this is a new setting for us this evening. We don't have no microphones, so we can speak nice and clearly. With that, this is the planning committee being held at 6 p.m. on the 28th of October. The meeting is being held also via Teams, and a copy of this recording will be available on the council's website within 5 working days. As we're at the college here this evening, we do have a finish time of 9:30, so I would ask officers and councillors to keep your questions brief. This is planning, so it does take I'm a little bit worried about getting through the agenda, but anything we'll obviously bring back next month, so we'll do that as we can. So with that, we will get started. First off, apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Churchman. Councillor Rigby may sub, sort of depends on whether she can make it on time. So that's Churchman. Do we have anyone else?
No, Chair, nobody else.
Fantastic. All right, so that leads us on to minutes of the last meeting on the 23rd of September 2021. Found on pages 5 to 14. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? No? Okay then. Are they agreed? Fantastic. That takes us on to item 3, items of urgent business. There are no items of urgent business. So that. Moving on to item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? I'm only after interest at this stage. Councillor Byrne and Councillor Howden.
Not a declaration of interest. I sent everyone an email the last week before this one about the farm.
Yeah.
So that is not about plan. Open-minded planning. My email was really against the inconsistencies. Things go through planning and don't go through planning. The same road and even so inconsistent. So it's about inconsistency, not the following.
So you're approaching that one with an
open mind. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And Councillor Howden.
Thanks, Chair. Item 10, land adjacent to Blackshot Stadium and Stamford Road. I was a supporter of winning the free school bid during 2016 to 2020 when I was the portfolio holder for education. Yeah. However, this detailed plan application is the first time I've seen it, so I approach it with an open mind.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, Councillor Polly.
Just as last meeting, I think I advised the monitoring officer that one of the applications, the application 211061, and there was no conflict of interest on that yet.
Okay, no, thank you for that. All right, so that's the declarations of interest. Going on to declarations of receipt of any correspondence. So this is any emails or phone calls that have taken place. On behalf of the committee, I received an email from Andrew Blakely. That was in relation to Mr. Heath. That was a resident, and I think that was in relation to having some concerns. And then I believe I had an email from Kelly Linnae, and that was on behalf of the Department of Education in favour. So I assume everyone received those. So I can declare that outside that, that's all I've received. Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. I've had an email meant for, it was addressed in the actual body of the email to Councillor Church, but obviously sent to me as well. Objections to the
Yep.
And I had exactly the same, but for Councillor Polly, just to me.
Right, I've got a few more hands, so I'll go to Councillor Howden and Councillor Blow.
An email from Councillor Head that I think was addressed to all of us.
Yeah.
This was just regarding the contract application.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Howden, for that. I'll receive that. Councillor Blow.
Yeah, just the one from Councillor Head.
Yeah. Excellent. Councillor Polly, was that the same?
So, I received lobbying on item 8, item 10, item 12, all in the same vein.
Yeah, all right, fantastic. All right, so that should be declaration of interest and cleared up, and receipt of correspondence. So taking it further, we then go on to planning reports found on pages 15 to 28. Are there any questions on planning reports? No. Okay. And then obviously item 7, which is the public address to the planning committee, which allows us to discuss the 5 items that are on the agenda this evening. So with that, we go to item agenda 8, which is Town Centre Car Park, King Street, Stanford Road, down on page 29 to 88, which is obviously the third item, and I understand Councillor Brown, I'm just going to just set out this one, who was in attendance last month, and that allows the rest of us to take this one forward. So with that, Nadia, would you like to present any updates from the last meeting? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Different to the room this time to last month. I'm still speaking up, so do shout or do let me know if you can't hear me. I'm not intending on running through the whole presentation as I did last month, but I can skim through it to just remind members of the Town Centre Car Park application generally as I move through. So members will remember that it's a scheme for 32 flats and 3 commercial units on the Town Centre Car Park, using a portion of the parking spaces in the car park and leaving a remainder of 42 for the use of a public car park. Members deferred the item last month for 3 reasons. Firstly, to see if officers could secure free car parking at the public car park, much of which was outside of the site. Secondly, for the applicant to provide further information regarding the heritage impact of the proposal upon the views of St Margaret's Church. And thirdly, to further understand what the contributions towards healthcare would be used towards. So in relation to all 3 matters, officers have been in discussion with both the applicant and the NHS for Mid and South Essex. And if I just get to a relevant image I can sit upon, I'll explain further. Let's go here for now, since we're talking about parking first. So in relation to parking, officers met with the applicant and discussed members' and residents' wishes. I can confirm that the applicant has agreed to provide free car parking for 3 hours with no return at the remaining public car park. This will be secured by a suitably worded legal agreement and will remain in situation in perpetuity should the application be favourably determined this evening, which I think members will hopefully see as good news. With respect to the heritage impacts, we'll find a suitable image to sit upon for members' benefit. There we go. With respect to the views and impacts upon St Margaret's Church, the applicant has provided greater detail within a further heritage note for members, the detail of which is included in the agenda. Further explanation regarding sight lines and views of the church has been provided, and it's considered that the proposals present minor changes to the relationship between the proposed development and the church. As previously advised, this would represent a low level of less than substantial harm, which is weighted against the overall public benefits of the scheme. As a reminder for members, the views of the church from the development and the locality can be seen here. And there were views taken from the Manor and from Southend Road. This is the view along Southend Road of the church. And further away from the Manor. Thirdly, members wanted to understand what the NHS healthcare contribution would be used towards. The NHS for Mid and South Essex has provided a breakdown of how it calculates the contribution requirements, which is essentially calculated on the net floor area of the existing practices and the likely number of new patients to be generated by a scheme. Full details of this are included in the report, and the NHS has confirmed that the contribution would be specifically utilised towards the Corringham Integrated Medical Centre for the benefit of patients of the Corringham surgery. A specific IRL reference has also been created to ensure this contribution is specifically linked to this healthcare facility and it receives that contribution. As a consequence of the follow-up investigation into these outstanding queries had by members, the application continues to be considered to comply with all relevant core strategy policies and is recommended for approval subject to Section 106 agreement and the conditions as stated on page 35 of your agenda. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Nadia. Over to Councillor Fletcher first. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. With regard to the parking, so the applicant is willing to provide 3 hours at a time. Matter of interest, what was the council officer's start point?
Our start point was that it should be for 3 hours. This was on the basis, if I may, Chair, this was on the basis of an assessment that both highways and planning officers did in regard to what would be a reasonable amount of time to allow members of the public to wish to be able to park and carry out their general business within that car park. And 3 hours was considered to be absolutely a reasonable amount of time. It doesn't cut any visitors or trips short. And then there was no objection to that.
So this is free of charge at any time for a period of 3 hours?
Yeah, just with no return.
My apologies if I sound a bit stucky here, but I'm just wondering where the 3 hours max came from, because that wasn't in what we were asking about.
3 hours, it seemed reasonable to give a limit to it rather than permanently free or unendingly free. There were many reasons given for that and discussed in discussions with the applicants. One concern raised by the applicant was a potential concern about antisocial behaviour that might occur if the car park was permanently free without end, because that could lead to issues relating to unacceptable behaviour or hanging out on the car park that wouldn't be encouraged really by the applicant or really desired by the council overall. Whilst that gap, to control that gift lies within the applicant's ability, it seemed a reasonable request to have a limit of 3 hours that provides that freedom to shoppers.
I'll leave it to other councillors to comment on whether that feels like what we actually asked for, but just to clarify, so this is the car park, their proposal, the proposal you agree with is the car park would be free, but for no more than 3 hours per car at any time. There is no point in which the car park is not.
One of the reasons for a time limit also is the fact it's very close to the station. Prior to us, actually, when we owned it as the council, we actually put a time on it, so that initially with it a long time ago, probably about 12 years ago, there was a time limit to stop commuters basically parking in the car park. And that's what the gentleman's actually afraid of, the fact that you'll get long stay parkers in there all the time. And when we considered, we thought, well, if you look at the range of shops that are in there, there are a number of restaurants now, there's hairdressers, there's the vets, those types of things. If you're going for a hairdo, you probably mine takes about 5 minutes on. I can't really comment, but that 3 hours seemed a fair time for somebody to go for. Bear in mind, most of the pubs all have their own car parks in the town. So if you were going to one of the pubs, there are pub car parks for parking. So if you're going to one of the restaurants, 3 hours seemed a fair.
That does actually sound like a reasonable reason for.
And the gentleman seemed acceptable with that sort of timing, because I think if you start going too long, then, as Nadia said, people will probably think they can overstay their welcome more than they can.
Just one other question. So we talked about the impact on the view of the church, and I noticed that what is being said is that it doesn't impact it greatly. From those pictures I saw, the long distance pictures, you could just about see something poking out, which I assume is the tower of the church. Call that view if you wish, but I was surprised that for the closer view, the medium view, that we weren't shown any superimpositions, because it isn't really possible from those images to get a clear idea just what is happening to the view of the church. Is there anything available that shows us just how it's going to change?
I can show you. This is the view up, if you don't mind, Chair, this is the view up Southend Road with the church in the centre background there. The development's actually to the right. So you can't see it in that image because it isn't there. It's not in the sight line of the church there. And there's a further plan. There's a further plan, sorry, the development is not. There's a further plan submitted.
Sorry, Nadia, if you go up, these pictures that these are the ones I'm talking about. If you go down a second, these are the ones I'm talking about, where I would actually have appreciated seeing where the church is in relation to those, because that gives me absolutely no idea how that development is going to impact the view of the church.
So this is the view. This is a generated image of the view from King Street, looking down the access at the moment. You can see the church there in the background.
There's that little bit of tower again.
That little bit of tower there, and there is a further sightline plan the applicant submitted. Find it, and it shows that view on a site plan from above, which will give you a clearer indication there. So it's from that point there, at the very top of the image there, that he looks directly down from the access through to the church, and the building would be to the right of that. So that's where that glimpse was seen from.
Okay, thank you.
The church itself is very much screened by a lot of foliage from, if you look right up close to it.
Yeah, it does appear to be about as invisible with this development as without it from the angles that you take.
Excellent. Well, Councillor Howard.
Thank you, Chair. I'm struggling to understand the development contribution in regards to health. The report says that the contribution requested is to provide additional floor space. That's what it says at 3.14. It then goes on to say that this amount will be utilised towards the Corringham Integrated Medical Centre. Things might have changed because I stood down as campaign for health almost 2 years ago now. But when I stood down, the scheme that we had approved had been through planning. I don't understand it's going back through planning. So the floor space, the plan, the layout is fixed. And the total budget envelope had been approved by NHS PropCo. So no additional finances is required. The floor plan won't change. So what is that development contribution actually for?
It will be for the Corringham Integrated Medical Centre, not to provide floor area. The confusion may come about because the NHS work out their calculations based on net floor area with respect to calculating a potential impact from the number of people generated by a scheme, which could have an impact upon the floor area of a practice. And in this instance, I pushed the NHS and asked them, I said, look, the members specifically wanted to know what the contribution would be used towards, given the amount that's quoted. And they said it would go directly towards the provisions at the medical centre. Now, that is as much information as we have, and it's for those patients from the Corringham surgery. There isn't any further detail we have in terms of what the money would be used towards, but it would go specifically towards the benefit of that medical centre and those patients listed there. So but I respect what you're saying with regards to the improved floor area for it.
The thing I don't understand is that when this came to committee last time, the report emphatically said that there is not the capacity in Stamford and Corringham to cater for additional patients. Therefore, development contribution was required.
Yeah.
This report says clearly that it's not just the calculation. The contribution request is the cost providing additional floor space. The floor space of the Corringham IMC is flatly not going to change. It's not going to change. Therefore, the only contribution that goes towards the IMC is the cost of outfitting it, equipment, so on and so forth. That has already been agreed as a part of the process to get around the referral around Alston Hospital through the Secretary of State. What is going to go into the Corringham IMC is a fixed entity with NHS PropCo. So they are not requesting additional funds. They are not requesting additional money. So again, I'm struggling to understand, if we pass this application and a core part of the application is, we do not believe that there are sufficient primary care facilities in Stamford and Corringham, therefore we are asking for this chunk of money, this is entirely opaque as to what that chunk of money is actually going to pay for people in Stamford and Corringham. And in terms of providing for the patients, let's pretend the report is incorrect, or what the NHS have told us is incorrect, and it's got nothing to do with floor space. We then have to suppose that it's talking about individual patients. So is that saying then that patients who go to live in this area, Stamford West, are then automatically going to be ported to a surgery in Corringham, bypassing 4 other surgeries en route? And this is strange.
Yeah, and as I say, this is the detailed response we've had from the NHS in Mid and South Essex. But I think it's important to remember that given the scale of the application, there is no requirement for us to actually even consult the NHS seeking healthcare contributions. This has come about from the previous consultation when it was a larger scheme where it almost tipped that threshold. This is below that requirement, and so that's why my own professional view is why we have a smaller amount requested, and why, when pushed, they've said it's likely to go towards this facility.
I do appreciate that, but you understand. Sorry, apologies, Chair. You understand my reason to be this finicky in detail. This application has come forward because Cabinet released the land a number of years ago. There were at the time, supposed understandings about what the community would see. Those understandings never materialised because what Cabinet did was not legally binding. Therefore, when I see a development contribution, which is meant to be in very definition binding, and it seems to me I can't work out how this health contribution has anything to do whatsoever with healthcare in Stamford and Corringham, you understand why the detail of the proposal is something that vexes me.
Yeah, I can understand your questions and your queries. I can provide the response the NHS have given. We have an IRL reference specifically for Stamford and Corringham healthcare provision, and that financial contribution will go towards that IRL, and the NHS have offered that further information as to what it's likely to provide money towards. So I understand your queries about what that would mean at the end of the day.
I mean, we know I know this is not purely an issue for you to address, but we know that parts of the NHS are quite good at gobbling up money. If Corringham and Stamford is being promised something in exchange for, or as mitigation for development, I'd rather like to know that what they're being promised is actually what they're going to be delivered. And right now, it's entirely opaque as to what this contribution actually does.
Yeah, and similarly, we can only deal with the planning application before us. We can't give any weight to what may have happened in the past that you may have previously mentioned. So, this decision is within members' gift based upon that further assessment and the fact that it does comply with all local plan policies.
My second part of my question was, in terms of the free parking that's secured, nowhere near as much as I would like to say, although I do think that 3 hours does feel like the right balance, that is going to be reflected later on in the development contribution.
What will be?
So the free parking, that's not actually a core part of the planning application itself, is it?
It is.
That will come as part of a separate 106.
Another recommendation is to approve, subject to that section 106, which secures the free parking and the contributions towards affordable housing, education, highways, and parking detail as part of that, and the healthcare contribution.
So
it's subject to that.
So, for example, if we did pass it this evening, if they then decided that they did not want to proceed with the development contribution for the free parking, they wouldn't be able to go to the planning inspector and say, well, to be fair, the council did pass it, subject to a minor caveat, so can I not have this on appeal, please?
No, because the reason for that is that tonight, this evening, if members decide they want to support this application and support what officers are recommending, that would be a resolution to grant planning permission. No actual planning permission, no decision notice would be issued until that 106 is signed and secured. So there would be nothing for the applicant, for example, to appeal against, because there is no decision notice issued. So it's subject to securing that 106 agreement, and then a decision notice could be issued. And if they then wanted to challenge that obligation, or if they chose not to go with any element of it, we could bring it back to committee, or indeed we could prosecute, because they're in breach of contract.
And that's indefinite then, free parking. Right, and so Councillor Piccolo and Councillor Fletcher, thank you.
Yeah, just bringing you to the recommendation B, where it talks about the parking. Just some clarification, I don't know if it's a typo or not, but it says to retain the public car park shown in blue, the system's fixed for a minimum 3 hours stay and no return period within 4 hours, and within the site private parking access. Sorry, just system fixed for a minimum 3 hours stay and no return period within 4 hours. Site provided parking. There's somewhere there where it says short-term parking with that's where the pricing system is fixed for a maximum of 3 hours. It says a pricing system. It's free parking. Is that a mistake?
Thank you. There shouldn't be a reference to a pricing system at all there.
Yeah, because that was my concern. It could slip through on the.
That's my hangover from the previous month. Apologies for that. So it should actually read, to be clear, as a short-term public car park with a maximum of 3 hours. So deleting the words pricing system fixed for A.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's good. That was really my only concern, and the fact that in the 106 agreement it will be legally binding. And I know sometimes they go for 106. They try to challenge a 106 agreement later on into the project. Quite often over affordable housing, we seem to come back to. What would be the situation if they were 3/4 of the way through the development, and they then suddenly come back and said, well, actually, we can't comply with that anymore. We're not going to give. What's the likelihood if we went to a build that the planning inspector would turn around and say, well, actually, you're going to have to knock all that lot down?
So, firstly, there would be no planning approval issues without the securing of the legal agreement. So they would have to have gone to the effort of agreeing, signing, and completing that to get their planning permission. If they started any development on site before getting that planning permission, that's at their own risk, and they would, it's a significant town centre regen strict scheme. They would be foolish to do that without that planning permission.
Oh, no, I totally understand that.
But
I'm saying perhaps they've signed all the agreements, they've signed the 106 agreements to say they're going to supply the parking 3/4 of the way into the development, like some developers do. They come back and say, actually, we need to vary the 106 agreement.
Yeah, like any planning permission, if they secure a 106 with the contributions, they get their planning permission, the site's then sold off. Somebody could come back and say, well, actually, we've bought that site in the knowledge of that 106, but we want to vary it. And a planning application could be submitted, but they would also need to submit a deed of modification to vary that legal agreement properly. And if they don't do that, nothing gets changed, and we would obviously then want to come back to members and say, this is what you agreed previously, given the local interest, what are your thoughts on reducing affordable housing, changing the parking arrangement, losing the education contributions for whatever's required. It might be that they're looking for a completely different scheme, but we're speculating.
Yeah,
I take your point.
Obviously, the parking is the thing that, also with some other things I was concerned about before, but it's now boiled down to the parking. And the problem that's arising now is because of the inadequacy of the original planning permission and the parking being tied to that planning application. And after 3 years, that planning application fails, and they then decide to put another one in, and the next one might not have the parking in it. So I was just looking at some way of trying to secure the fact that that parking space is secured in perpetuity somehow, right?
And
Yeah.
it would be with the 106, because that goes with the land, but that won't be, the planning permission wouldn't be issued until that is secured. And anyone taking on the site in the future would know that comes with it.
Yeah, the only concern, the only one other concern I have is that the site isn't actually, the car park where the 106 agreement is crossed land, isn't actually within
The red line.
the red line, which means that, again, they might say, actually, we'll sell that to a developer as a completely separate interest. That developer, having bought the land, wouldn't be obliged to apply by the 106 agreement to the original developer. So I'd like to see that blue line actually included within the red line.
Yeah, we aren't able to make the applicant do that,
No.
but with the reason for 106 is that the applicant owns and controls that land,
Yeah.
and it is associated within the planning permission because it's
But
specifically
the
referred to.
developers are very shrewd, and he could sell that piece of land on tomorrow, and with the new developer saying, well, actually, that 106 agreement don't apply to me. I'll just put in another planning application. I'm sorry, Gerald, sort of moving the debate. I'll leave that, but you can see my points, and anything that can be done to tie it up so we don't get the same debacle of the first time it went is really important to the residents of Stanley.
Thank you.
Wagcoring and the surrounding areas, to be honest
I'm
with you.
just going to clarify the point that section 106 is run with the land, they don't run with the developer. So if they sell the land on, then the new landowner takes on that 106 and the liability that runs with it and the history that sits with that 106 is applied to the new landowner. So it's not the individuals. So if he sells it on, he'll sell it on with an obligation sitting on it. So it probably have very little value. It's pretty hard.
Well, thanks for that, Clarence.
Excellent. Okay, Councillor Fletcher, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just very quickly, given the discussion around this contribution towards healthcare, and the size of it, given the points that Councillor Hall has made around the fact that the integrated health centre facilities are already fixed, and given that the NHS can't actually really give us any kind of clear idea what they'll use of it, I'm wondering whether there's any reason in looking at the benefits of the scheme, whether we should continue to see that particular point as relevant.
I mean, is there any process that you put in place to overlook how the money is spent by the NHS, or because obviously there's a concern that it may not be spent where it should be. I mean, is there anything to overlook and make sure that they're not shortchanged?
What we did, Chair, following the last meeting was set up a specific infrastructure requirement list reference solely for healthcare for foreign and staff of the home, which is what is now tied and will be tied to that contribution. So we know it would go towards these areas only. That would be the normal way of controlling contributions as we would for education and housing or any other highway matters or anything relating to a location. And we have the IRL, which is a living document for that reason, to secure those funds for specific parts of the borough.
Okay, so I don't see any other hands raised. So what we'll head into now is debates, and obviously there's a recommendation there. So I'll start this evening with the King Street. So we have been here before. I think obviously, if it was straightforward yes or no, actually for me it would be no, because I think that parking in town centres is vitally important. But we're not there. We know the history. It is what it is, unfortunately. And we looked at this a couple of years ago. I think we were right to reject it then. It was quite big, it was quite bulky. And I think what they've come back with now is a smaller scheme. And I think realistically, in terms of our powers and planning, I think we've done the best we can with this one. I think it was a good little bit of work last month to defer and for them to come back with that 3 hours free parking. That's important, that 3 hours, so that those spaces are recycled, so more people can use them. I don't think it's all bad news. I actually think that I do like the design of these flats. And on that basis, I will be supporting this evening. I think in terms of the questions raised by NHS, they're good. I think they've got a lot of substance behind them. I think they actually more to do with planning law and whether what's been said in the NHS is acceptable. But yes, very good points raised. And with that, I'll certainly be leading my support to this application this evening. So who else would like to say? Councillor Howard?
Thanks, Chair. First of all, I do really commend the work that officers have done. Getting 3 hours free parking for a certain amount of spaces is a hell of a lot more desirable than we were a couple of months ago. So I commend officers for their efforts. I think, Chair, when we look at this, there's not a single member of the committee who is saying that they think this application is good for town centre viability. There's not a single member of the committee who is saying that the parking fulfils what was originally promised to people of Stamford and Corringham when Cabinet sold the land. There's not a single member of the committee who is saying that they think that this application represents truly quality regeneration. What I've heard from our last meeting and our last debate is the fact that certain members of the committee are simply concerned that this application will go through on appeal. Well, if that's the case, then quite frankly, there's no point in having a planning committee because the threat of appeal is there for every application. And I will say it's in no way a knock to the professional planning function of council, but there's a planning application very recently in my homestead seat that got through on appeal, but that was granted through delegated decision. So it's simply not the case that every recommendation put in front of us for refusal or approval is infallible. It just isn't. It's a judgment call. And from my point of view, I've listened very carefully to what Councillor Heather said in his letter, because certainly he's been fighting for the residents of Stamford for a very long time on this. I think that if you look at the health contribution, the 106 agreement doesn't make a lick of sense to me. And what Councillor Piccolo teased out regarding the parking, yes, it's very unfortunate that the parking doesn't form a core part of this application. So what we can do to bind them, yeah, there's only so many levers that we physically have to pull. But that still feels to me that we're left in a very, very vulnerable position, and I just don't feel minded to vote for an application where two core planks of the 106 agreement, health and parking, seem to be held together through relatively weak 106 agreements. You know, the threat of appeal doesn't bother me that much because appeals are a fact of planning law. They happen every single day. And on the basis, I'm not hearing anyone say that they think this is a terribly exciting development for the town. I will be voting against it. Although, as I said, I do appreciate the efforts the officers have gone to, and that what they have secured in parking is certainly far more substantial than what we had previously. And I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Howden. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of substance in what you're saying. I suppose on this particular application, we have a bit more of a luxury because we had been here before. We was here 2 years ago, and we did reject it then. Obviously, then we would have been fearful of losing on appeal. It went to appeal, we didn't lose. But obviously, there is information on this report here that the material considerations we used last time would probably not stand up on appeal this time. So, yeah, I get what you're saying. I think we have done due diligence in that point. I get what you're saying about the threat we shouldn't feel threatened, but we do have that element of responsibility as well, because if you're not deemed to be responsible, then you can get hit as council in terms of fines as well. So yeah, it is what it is. I think we've done the best we can, but I understand why you vote against it, and I've got no issues with that.
Sorry, Chair, I would just say that you are right, but if you did go back to a planning inspectorate, as much as we think that they are these slightly shadowy figures, they're not a homogenised group. Different planning lawyers come up with different opinions in the same way that different judges do, different cabinet members do. Yeah. So just because we won on appeal last time on a couple of not strongest grounds in the world, that doesn't mean a different team looking at the application would actually say, actually I think that the council are jolly right, that this application does represent a threat to the viability of the town, and therefore they are well within their purview to reject it. So I'm not entirely convinced that rejecting it is actually unsound ground on viability terms.
Okay, all right, nice. Well, I like that planning. You can have opinions, you can agree or disagree. So yeah, we'll see what you say. We'll just right. Councillor Piccolo.
I think someone.
If you don't mind, Michelle, I was just going to say that's a fair point. you can get a mix of planning reviews by planning inspectors over a period of time. And very, very, very rarely you do get the odd maverick decision. I think that's fair to say. In this case, this decision was very recent. It was, within this year, so January. So I think the chances of a different decision being made if this application is refused for any of the reasons discussed tonight and previously are in all honesty, very slim, and I think there is a more significant risk of facing costs. I really do. So I would urge caution in that, but I utterly understand what members are saying about wanting to secure things, and I think it's for the people of the town and to ensure that parking and other matters remain, and the 106 is the way to do it.
Thank you, Councillor Pickler.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what some of the fears that people are saying. That my biggest fear is at the moment, because we haven't talked about, there is actually 57 parking spaces. 12 of them are going to be charged for, but they are used by the general public. We don't know what the charging costs are for them, but there is an actual fact 57 parking spaces for the general public. Some of the 12 are probably, I think 12 are long-term parking places. I am concerned that because of the previous ruling on appeal, where parking was not seen as a problem, the loss of the car park wasn't seen as a problem. So, that we are in danger of actually losing any car parking spots. They could even drag it on for long, they could drag the application on for longer, whatever goes on. I, as a local council stand, begrudgingly, but on the probability of what we could, our best win is. I think the fact that we've secured 57 parking spaces for shoppers in Stamford, along with technically, if you said there was a 9-hour day, you could say we've secured 135 parking spaces for shoppers for the town centre, because 45 times 3. So I say, as begrudged I am, I'm not prepared to gamble the livelihood of Stamford Hope on this going to appeal and then not including the free parking any. So that's my view. So I will be supporting the application, begrudgingly, I might say.
Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like, if I may, to just try and put a line under this whole question around appeals. We're not here to judge this application on whether or not somebody else might disagree with. Firmly, we're here to judge it on its merits. I would like to suggest we park the whole question of what might happen depending on the decision we make, focus instead on the benefits versus the, for want of a better word, disbenefits or harm represented by this development. It's clear that it does represent a degree of harm, described as not substantial from heritage point of view. It's also clear that it's going to severely limit the current parking. Against that, we have to ask how big a contribution is it going to make to the housing needs of Stamford town centre and of the area. I'm not entirely sure, from what I've heard from the ward councillors, that we're really that clear how big a positive contribution it's going to make. I'm not come down entirely either way yet, but I'd like to just suggest we quit going down the rabbit hole of what might happen in the appeal. It's not relevant. Let's look at this thing on its merits and make a decision tonight based on its merits.
Okay, Councillor Councillor Howard.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just say to Councillor Fletcher, the argument about harm versus benefit and the there is tremendous benefit of new housing. It houses residents and also provides new shoppers for the town. I get that, but if we put this in perspective, we're talking about 32 residential units at this site. Yes, that part of Stamford West over recent years, the Barrett's development is 500 units.
354.
354 units. The Barrett's development alone is 10 times bigger than this. So if anyone is looking at this and saying there's tremendous benefits in terms of housing and shoppers, I think the benefits are actually really quite minimal and really quite narrow. So for me, it's about the viability of the town centre, which is a thriving local economy based around people being able to move, which is an abundance of parking, which this doesn't deliver. And I don't think a low number of residential units represents a huge bonanza in either housing people or providing new shoppers for the town. I also clarify, I'm not the ward councillor. Councillor Collins. I'm
thinking council Henry.
I know we both look very similar, so the way my hair's going, but
Chair, just to clarify, just for once, I wasn't talking about councillor. Not everything I say is about you, isn't it? No.
Oh.
Yeah, but we have, that's useful because I think that's, to be honest, what we should be talking about. What's the benefit versus the, let's get that clear. We can make a decision based on that, not based on what might happen.
I don't perceive the benefit.
Councillor Bigelow.
Yeah, just that we have got a problem in Stamford at the moment is that short-term shoppers are parking on all the yellow lines. You cannot, sometimes the buses can't get through the town centre because they're parked both sides of the roads. The same happens in King Street. And the reason they do that is because they don't want to go in the car park and pay £1 to pop in and buy local bread. Okay. So the fact that we've now got somewhere for 45 cars to pop and park for nothing, yeah, so they can pop and get the local bread and disappear in 15 minutes time, will be a massive benefit to the road safety in Stamford. Not only that, because there's free parking, it gives more force, should we say, to the wardens and the people who walk around and to the council in general to come down harder on the people that park on the yellow lines. Because there is going to be free parking and there's very little excuse to say, well, I only park there for 5 minutes because I'm just going to pop in and get a loaf of bread. That's why it'd be nice if it was more, but 45, to my mind, could solve a lot of the problems in Stamford and the town centre. And I think that's what it's the viability of the town centre that we're looking at. And there needs to be some level people can park, feeling safe. You hear the story, they drive around Stamford Treetops because they can't find anywhere to park and nothing to drive into Corrie. Yeah. That 45 spaces, but short term, would alleviate that problem. So that's my view as why I'd support the application.
Okay, right, so I don't think there's any more hands raised. So what we'll do, there is a recommendation set out on page 35. We've got the two recommendations this evening, both obviously with the need to heavy support and all support recommendations. So I'll support recommendation A, and is that seconded? Councillor Lydiard. Okay, so it's Councillor Kelly opposing, Councillor Lydiard seconded. All those in favour of recommendation A, please raise your hands. Okay, that's 6 in favour, and all those against. Okay, thank you. And that takes us on to recommendation B, which is to approve the application. Although I'll propose that, is that seconded? All those in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, that's fine. And all those against. Excellent. And is there any abstentions there? One abstention. All right then, thank you everyone. That's King Town Centre Car Park, agenda item 8, 20.00. 6 has been approved. Oh, thank you. Right, that then takes us on to the second item on the agenda, which is item 9, welcome back Councillor Thurrock. This is land adjoining Balgownie Farm.
Yeah.
You've got a copy of it. Right. Off it goes.
Excellent.
This was on the agenda last month. We ran out of time. So it's back on the agenda with an update report. And since the last agenda and since the update report, we've had a further consultation response, or the missing consultation response, I should say, from the Built Heritage Advisor, who we consulted because there's a listed building, a grade 2 listed building to the north. And in a nutshell, two pages can be summarised as the applicant's heritage statement is considered inadequate, and secondly, the advisor has concluded that the proposal would cause harm to the significance of the listed building, which is to the north. So going on to the actual scheme, which you haven't seen yet, so this is new to you. That's the application site. So Lower Dunton Road, as you can make out with my little arrow is north-south there. That's Dudley Lane at the bottom part there. Is quite close to the sort of northeastern boundary of the borough. In fact, the boundary with Basildon is roughly about there, and then jumps up north along Lower Dunton Road. That's an aerial image. We're talking about the site, which is in here. That's an extract from the local plan showing the planning policies, and that green notation, which you can probably see, tells you that the site's in the Metropolitan Greenbelt. So the proposal before you is for the construction of 6 detached dwellings. It's an outline application with a matter of landscaping reserved. All other matters, access, layout, appearance and scale are for consideration, but landscaping has been reserved. So all that green landscaping you can see there is not for consideration. So strike that from your mind. Just consider the access, the arrangement of buildings, and I'll get onto the elevations in a minute. So there are 2-storey detached residential properties, 2 house types, fairly similar, fairly conventional, fairly traditional in their appearance, of 4-bedroom properties, integral garage spaces, and that's the different house type, again, not that dissimilar from the top image. And there are some proposed visuals which have been provided, but again, ignore the landscaping because that's not consideration tonight. This site does have a planning history. So earlier this year, under delegated powers, a proposal for 7 units was refused. It was refused for reasons relating to greenbelt, impact on character and impact on heritage assets. So that was the scheme which was refused, and basically the difference between that scheme and the current scheme is this unit at the top part there has been removed. So that's current with some additional landscape in there, and that's the application which is refused, which had that additional unit there. In terms of planning history, because you may have spotted on probably this plan here, that there are some fairly recently constructed properties, 8 in total, arranged there. and that is a site which is described as land at Balgony Farm, whereas this site, which is in red there, is described as land adjoining Balgony Farm. So I'll explain the detail there. So there are 8 detached residential properties which have fairly recently been completed. And in terms of the history, that's a 2018 approval, which was then amended via Section 73. So that's a variation of conditions in part one. So that's what you'll see on the ground. You'll see on the pictures at the moment. The site in question here we're talking about is this open area, which you can imagine, and that arrangement of dwellings is arranged around a new access road. So the site in front of you is this area, top right. So the reason why those 8 dwellings were approved is because in the past, and this is a 2014 aerial picture, in the past there were a collection of buildings, structures, which you can make out, various paraphernalia, which have historically been on the site. Now that, in Greenbelt terms, count as previously developed land, and national policy allows replacement buildings of previously developed land. So that's why there is a collection of 8 buildings, which is basically an L shape, where I'm marking on my cursor there. Again, just making the point, the current is this open area through there, so it doesn't count as previously developed because it's got no curtain on it. Got some pictures which I'll run through to put that in context. So that's Lower Dunton Road looking north, so looking away from Thurrock and towards Basildon. The site is behind that hedgerow on the left-hand side. That's taken inside the site, so that's the new access road which has been put in, or the upgraded access road, I should say, to put into service 8 buildings on the former arrangement of buildings. That is the current site behind the hedgerow, so Lower Dunton Road off the right-hand side there. That's looking towards the new housing development, 8 in total, and again the site is this area here. And looking towards the new development. So the new development, that's looking sort of southwest along the new access road, which then does a 90-degree turn, and there are 4 dwellings there. So it's 4 on the left-hand side and 4 there. But so they replace the former structures which were there on the site, whereas the current application site, I'll get to one more, I think there's one more, is that area there. Now there are some floodlight columns, is the best way to describe them, because aerial pictures show that at some stages in the past there were some portable football goals there, and the applicant has described it as being used as a football pitch. It's not that it hasn't got any designation like that, it's only got a Greenbelt designation, it's not designated as open space, and those floodlights I wouldn't consider to be fixed structures. So there are no buildings on the site. So Greenbelt policy being Greenbelt policy, we have to go through the usual arguments for and against. Residential development in Greenbelt is inappropriate, therefore it's harmful by definition. We have to look at harm to openness, and you can clearly see the site is open, so there would be harm to openness, and the purposes of the Greenbelt, or the fundamental characteristics of the Greenbelt, are permanence and openness. So it's about keeping land permanently open. So there would be harm to openness, and we also consider there would be harm to 2 of the 5 Greenbelt purposes, which is about safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, and then trying to encourage development on brownfield site as opposed to open Greenbelt land. So as per usual, you need to put significant weight on those factors in the Greenbelt balance, and then you have to look at what other harms there are, which I'll get onto into a minute. But before you get to that point, or as part of the argument, you need to look at the arguments which have been put forward by the applicant, which could conceivably amount to very special circumstances if the arguments were strong enough. So what the applicant is saying is that the council has a lack of 5-year housing land supply, which we know about, and it's been a long-standing issue, and that should be given weight. It should be given in the weight in the context this is 6 dwellings, and the council's yearly requirement is considerably in excess of 6 units. The applicant is also referring to a financial contribution towards affordable housing. Now, I'll get onto that in a minute because that's a little bit complex on this case, to put it lightly. So I'll just park that for a second. The final argument which the applicant is putting forward is the presumption in favour of sustainable development. And paragraph 11 of the NPPF does contain a presumption in favour of sustainable development, but that doesn't apply in the Greenbelt. So in the Greenbelt, all bets are off. The presumption in favour of approving simply does not apply. Going back to the applicant's case about making a financial contribution to affordable housing, they refer to a figure of £200,000. In the update report, we've considered this matter in quite some detail, basically because, or partly because, on the last agenda you considered a site in Fogging, I think it was, where there was a stage 1 part of the development which was approved by a previous committee, and the applicant was looking towards a sort of stage 2 of a single development, and the argument put forward by officers at that time was if you combine those 2 developments, because they shared an access road, etc., and they could be read as the same development, it went over the trigger for the provision of affordable housing. No affordable housing was being provided, therefore that was a reason for refusal. Now we've looked at that, and there is a legal test called the tripartite test, and what that involves is looking at land ownership, looking at whether or not a development should be treated as a single planning unit, and whether or not development should be treated as a single development. So the 3 sort of tests apply, and it's against the context of something called threshold manipulation, because it's something I've come across in my time at other authorities, whereby some developers will know what the thresholds are and will release land incrementally so that they perhaps try and steer clear of certain obligations, putting it as politely as I can. So it is a factor, and it's a factor which is well known within planning circles, and indeed there's a whole section within our planning encyclopedia on it. So we've looked at that, and in terms of the tests, we think the ownership test is relevant for the reasons set out within the update report. Although the single planning unit test would necessarily apply, we consider that the existing development in combination with what's being proposed can be treated legitimately as a single development. They share the same access road. That's one of the key factors. So if you were driving past, you'd read it as a single development, in which case the 8 units plus the 6 units equals 14 units. That means affordable housing should apply. The applicant has made an offer of £200,000. That hasn't been subject to any viability, and the applicant maintains that the 2 sites aren't linked, in which case, put it bluntly, we cannot accept £200,000. It's not related to the development, it doesn't meet the planning tests. So there is a third reason for refusal we are now suggesting. I'm not going to, because I'm against time, I'm not going to go through all the other issues. The principal issue here is Greenbelt, it's inappropriate, it's harmful, there's harm to a heritage asset, also needs to be weighed into the harm. The applicant is promoting 3 factors in favour of the development. They do not clearly outweigh the harm in our opinion. We're suggesting there's a third reason for refusal, adding all that together with a recommendation for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right then, so with that, do we have any questions for Matt, Councillor Byrne and Councillor Howard?
Right. Large red roads over the road. That is an entry point of 750,000. There's no affordable there, and that's sailed through, and we clapped it through because they offered a 4-bed hospital. So it seems the big boys, when they come with their carrots, they go, yes please, come in Mr. Red Road, and then we've got family business, who are still offering £200,000, we're saying no. We said yes to a whole 55 village in the same road, and we said please come in, don't need affordable. That's 500. That's £500,000 entry. So we are in that same road. We're not being consistent. We're welcoming the big builder, and the little builder we're saying no. All because they offer carrot. This guy's offering a carrot. So the different types of carrots.
Chair, I think the difference between that's Little Melrose Farm, I think, isn't it? So it's on the eastern side of Dublin Road, further to the south.
No difference with the red one.
I was originally case officer that in 2014. My personal recommendation was that should be refused. That didn't go through because the chief planning officer had a different view. But I'm just giving you my personal take on it. The key difference why the chief planning officer at the time considered it could be recommended for approval, because at that time the council was looking to progress a local development framework. So we had the core strategy and we were looking at site-specific options. In one of the consultations, which is probably about 2013 off the top of my head, that site was promoted as a site for a hospice with enabling development. So the hospice has to be paid for. How do you pay for it? So the consultation document, which was published, and it's probably still online if you want to look at it, said a number of residential dwellings, I think it was 50 off the top of my head, can pay for that, and that's potentially an exception from normal greenbelt policies. That doesn't apply here.
They're just giving the equivalent of a hospital in £200,000.
Well, I think I've covered the £200,000 point. There's if what the applicant's saying is the sites aren't linked, but they're going to give us £200,000. Now, okay, that's a nice offer. The council's legal advisor would be saying to me, what does it meet the planning tests? Because you can't, putting it bluntly, you can't buy a planning permission. So does it relate to the development? I'm not good. You know, that's gone. I had a personal professional opinion about that, but that's gone, and there was a council document which
was involved with the over 55 village. We welcome that bloke now. That's also an entry to this same road.
Again, I'm not the case officer, and officers recommend refusal on that one if you're talking about the golf course. So
also, what I would say, sorry to cut you in, it can be an officer recommendation for refusal approval. It doesn't mean it's
I know that. It's just so we've not seemed to be giving anything to a local builder. We're just saying red road can do what they like in local builder.
I was part of the red road decision, and I mean, look, you come discuss you come with those nice executive homes. I like the look of it. Obviously, we're going to the debate on this one.
Yeah,
and thank you. Do you have any further questions?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, I'll go to Councillor Howland and Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks. Matt, can you just help me understand the criteria, trigger point of what constitutes previously developed land? So you're saying it's not previously developed land because there's clearly never been any buildings there, no hard standing there, and the light structures appear to be temporary nature. Whereas the applicant is saying, no, this was sport, recreation, football fields, therefore it was developed. Is there actually a dictionary definition that allows you to say this is what is a previously developed site?
yeah, so National Planning Policy Framework, the July 2021 edition, because it does change now and again, defines previously developed land, or PDL as we like to call it, as land which is or was occupied by a permanent structure, including the curtilage of the developed land, although it should not be assumed that the whole of the curtilage should be developed. And then there's a list of stuff about exceptions, about agricultural, blah, blah, blah. So it's about land which is or was occupied by a permanent structure.
Right, so even if it was, for argument's sake, permanently used as a sports recreation ground, the lack of permanent structure there means it's not actually developed land.
There's got to be development in the planning sense of the word, which is a permanent building. Now, that can mean, and that definition probably has changed a bit over time. It's probably eased up a little bit. I'm looking at Louise because, yeah, it's probably eased up a bit because the building doesn't necessarily have to be there because it says land which is or was occupied. So you could have had a building which is cleared and you just have the hard standing. That would necessarily count. But there is also the policy test, which is within paragraph whatever it is, which says even if it is PDL, so even if there were structures on site or the remnants of former structures, you have to look at the relative impact of what's being proposed against what is there or what was there. Now, you've seen the aerial pictures, and yeah, okay, there's those lighting columns which wouldn't count as buildings. There's a legal test about buildings, which is size, permanence, and physical attachment. They're not buildings. Even if they were, the relative impact of 6 4-bedroom dwellings against what is there it's completely different. So it's not PDL, and even if you counted those lighting columns, it's nowhere near the impact. The relative impact is completely different.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get an idea, Matt, of the relative importance of the different factors. So we're being asked to reject this because of where it's sitting, but we're also being asked to consider this whole issue of artificially breaking up a larger development. I read that in your report. I totally got it. It seems to me that it's being sort of rather artificially being described as two developments when if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. However, if the applicant were to say, yeah, okay, fair cop, gov, it is all basically one development, let's talk about just affordable housing. How big an impact would that have on whether you as a team accepted this development? Or is it not so much a duck as a red herring?
Your primary consideration, and I think my primary consideration, is the Greenbelt argument. I mean, that's because Greenbelt policy is so restrictive for good reason, and it's been a long-standing tenet of planning law since planning law started, basically. So we're suggesting the third reason for refusal. We shouldn't be getting into prioritising, 1, 2, and 3. They're all important because there's a heritage asset fairly close by, and the advice from the Built Heritage Advisor is there's harm, and that has to be weighed in the balance. And is that so? If you've got harm from it's not policy compliant, there's no affordable housing, and harm in Greenbelt and harm in heritage, what's clearly outweighing that harm? And our view is there isn't anything clearly outweighing that harm.
This is why to some degree I was a bit, although I totally agree with that, I didn't quite get not so much relevance, but the importance of that element around I got the tripartite rule, but actually even if they fessed up, we're not going to say yes.
No, the Greenbelt and the heritage issues would remain, yes.
Yeah.
Now, on that front, Matt, I think a couple of us had a look, and if you look at that area, immediately to the north of it, and immediately to the west of it, so to the north along the road and to the west of this development, there is existing housing. A fair bit of existing housing.
So
Yeah, sure. It comes out really well on the larger map. Actually, that's quite.
Yeah, that one.
That shows.
that's the former previously developed land. I mean, that doesn't show.
So maybe
There's the listed building of. Let's get Google up because we default to Google, don't we?
it helps. There's certainly one of your views there. I think not so much the actual photography view, the larger layout, which seemed to suggest that there were houses immediately to the west and to the north.
Yeah,
I just think I was thinking, well, why is it okay there and not here? So that was
right. So I mean let me just sort of clarify that a bit.
Yeah, please.
So okay, I'm going to jump around a bit. Bear with me.
Don't worry.
So which is described as land at or whatever. So it's this open area here, which is on. Historically, there was an area in there which was occupied by a number of structures, which was the former previously development. That's got 8 houses. The aerial picture, which I had. There we go. So that part of the site there, and sort of wraps around a little bit, has been redeveloped. So you've got 8 new houses in existence. Which that's the new build, but that's replacing all that stuff there, which is a range of buildings,
Yeah.
permanent structures, you've got some hard standings, we've got some vehicle storage by the look of it as well. So that's the trade-off with PDL. The relative impact of what's there, and you can see it, against 8 houses, but there's no additional harm, that's acceptable in the green belt.
Yep.
Building on an open site, which is that chunk there, well, it's not PDL, so the argument falls away. In the wider area, just to give you the full picture, yeah, I mean, that looks like former or possibly current agricultural, that's in Basildon. And then you've got, that's the listed buildings, think that one there, and again, there's some agricultural, horticulture, whatever type buildings. And then you've got, well, bits and pieces, and then you've got the little Malgraves site further down. So it's sporadic residential, farm, you know, type stuff.
It's a ribbon development all the way down there.
So that would not be described, for instance, as maybe shown in that age, that would not be described as limited to that.
Not in my view. So again, limited infilling of villages can be acceptable. That doesn't meet any sort of reasonable interpretation of what village is. No, not in my opinion.
Okay, thanks, that's useful. It was that stuff around it that was concerning me.
Okay, thank you. Right, any further questions? Okay, no further questions at the moment. Go on to, we do have a speaker statement here, which is Mark Jackson, who's the agent, and I understand he's virtual this evening. Mark, you've got your statement here, you've got 3 minutes in which to present your case. Thank you. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, members. Thank you, Chairman. Just to make one point, one of the reasons we put forward exceptionally was paragraph 149G of the NPPF, which allows for limited infilling, and then it goes on to talk about all the partial or complete redevelopments of previously. So there's 2 sections there: limited infilling or the partial development of previously developed land. So that was one of the main thrusts we also put forward. Just to carry on though, I'm instructed by Messrs Marcel to make a statement in support of their application. The application involves the development of a former football pitch for housing and a financial contribution. This is a revised application, as you've heard, which seeks to address the objections raised by officers in January, and the proposal omits one of the dwellings to seek to try and protect the setting of the listed building. There's also revisions to the layout, and additional areas for landscaping is shown within the drawings. The site is adjoined on 3 sides by 9 houses. These are to the south, west and north. To the east is Lower Dunton Road. The proposal is to erect 6 4-bedroom executive houses. Planning permission was granted for the 8 houses on the adjoining land. The development constitutes limited infilling and will not have any greater impact on the openness of the greenbelt compared with existing development. Therefore, the proposal is in accordance with paragraph 149 of the National Planning Policy Framework. The proposal constitutes low density development, and it will include significant landscaping to visually enhance the site's appearance. An existing access will be used to access the site, reducing any visual impact from Lower Dunton Road itself. The scheme will make an important contribution towards the housing deficit of the borough, both in terms of the number of dwellings, but also by providing 6 large executive family homes, which are needed in the area. The site is over 0.5 hectares, therefore in accordance with the policy CSTP2, an off-site affordable housing contribution to the council is being offered of £200,000. This was referred to within the planning statement accompanying the application by my clients, and the applicants were a little concerned that the updated officer's report did not refer to this. The land to the rear was separately sold off some time ago, developed, and the plots all have new residents. In terms of layout and design, the increased spatial separation in this revised application between the proposed houses and Dunton Hall will ensure that the setting of the listed building is respected. Land itself is not associated with the hall. Finally, the proposal will provide employment for builders and suppliers employed to undertake the development. The future residents will increase the number of people using facilities and services close by, and just as the development on the adjacent site, this site is equally sustainable. Given the evidence presented within this application, we respectfully request the Council grant planning permission subject to a Section 106 agreement with obligations addressing an affordable housing contribution and a financial contribution towards the Essex Coast RAM zone of influence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so are there any further questions? Councillor Byrne, question, please.
I'm sorry, question, no.
Oh,
Sorry.
no, sorry, I'm heading to debate now, there's no further
Sorry.
questions. All right, so we'll head into debates. Councillor Byrne first, thank you, and then Steve Taylor.
Yes, I've been on this committee 2.5 years now, and it's been a constant thing. We need executive homes for attractions of industry, the people that bring with them jobs, the people that bring with them money. In this family, they don't want to build on Oldham. They are what I like to say this family is to charity. They look after the church, they pay their gas bills, they pay their electric bills, they employ 18 people in Terryville. They're not a family that's going to build and run like Redrow. Redrow over the road, we've accepted that because of given carrot. If we don't say yes to this, we are saying you can only build a Lower Duncan Road if you give a little carrot with it. Because we've done it twice. And then we go, yes please, come in. These people are given a carrot, so don't see that they're local builders creating jobs. They are creating houses for the capture of industry. We might even get some of our officers moved from Kent for houses that are nice as this. So we are giving, and things like, I know they've told me they're putting in car charging points as Dan, something else we ask for every month. This is ticking many, many boxes. And for a family that are actually all about poor, and they're not cut and run. So I can't see it. We're not consistent. It's just saying carrots count. That's all that matters. That's all that is any conversation.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Steve Taylor, then Councillor Allen.
Thanks, Chair. Well, needless to say, I don't suppose it would come as anybody as a surprise that I'm going to oppose it because it's in the green belt before we start. But just to clear up 1 or 2 points, when people are talking about what Redrow did, one of the fundamentals that everybody here should understand, and I'm sure does, is that you don't quote precedent because there isn't such a thing from a planning perspective. So what happened up the road some years ago, which Matt has explained earlier, is, as far as I'm concerned, totally irrelevant. It was still wrong, but it happened. In terms of development, this authority refused a development, a place called Hoblitz Farm, where there was 2 cottages that had not been lived in for getting on for 100 years. It didn't come to the planning committee, but it was refused to replace what were 2 cottages with 1 dwelling. And that went on for 10 years and never ever happened. So the fact that if something's been developed before doesn't necessarily mean, even with the foundation and everything still there, that you automatically can develop it, because this authority has refused that within the last 10 years. So I know times change, but they don't change that dramatically. In terms of going back to this particular application, it's on the Greenbelt. I've said it before, it's the narrowest part of the Greenbelt. So the Greenbelt is established 25 to 35 miles wide around London. That's why it's called the Metropolitan Greenbelt. At this point, it's about 5 miles. It's not that narrow anywhere else around London. What's worse is coming straight through the middle of it, if what I believe is going to happen, and I think we seem to have accepted is going to happen, the Lower Thames Crossing is going to cut that in half. When that cuts it in half, you've got kind of 2 miles and 2 miles. That doesn't sound much to me like the initial intention of what the Green Belt was all about. In terms of the development itself, the site that they're talking about, there are no pavements, there are no local services. All you've got is very high-speed traffic and lots of it. So no one can get on and off the site without getting onto a very, very busy road. And I don't care who you are, anyone who tries that, even out of the golf club with a big wide splay, it's not safe. And that's why there's been dozens of accidents down that road over the last few years. In terms of thinking about children, you've got no pavements, you've got no buses. And can you imagine when they pick up their electric scooters and to try and bowl their way down the Lower Dunham Road? It's scary to even think about. So as far as I can see, there are no special circumstances around this development. Personally, I think it looks cynical the way it's been done in two halves, which is the point Matt was making earlier. And I don't see any reason why anybody would support it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to Councillor Howden.
Thank you. Instinctively, I'll oppose it because it is in Greenbelt, but I think it's very difficult to oppose given the fact that the three core reasons are damage to the openness of the Greenbelt and appearing out of character with the vicinity. Now, whether or not the first stage of development should or shouldn't have been approved is really neither here nor there. It was approved. This site wraps around the proposed development, so there is no openness to the Greenbelt. If you stand directly opposite it, you're facing a small housing development, and there's no argument to say it will be out of character because character's been established by the new small housing developments. So, yeah, instinctively, I would say oppose because it is Greenbelt. However, committee has passed an application that virtually snakes around the whole of the site. So it feels incredibly hollow to oppose this on the openness of the Greenbelt argument and on the grounds of being out of character when there's established character there now and the openness of the Greenbelt for that particular patch is now gone. So I just feel that the logical grounds to reject it, Chair, are gone. So at the moment, I'm more minded to vote in favour.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. I know how Councillor Holden feels when you look at something like this, and there'll be one or two you look at, or you do kind of think this is almost principle against just practical consideration. But this is why I was asking Matt the question. What's clear is yes, there's been building to the west of it, to the north of it, but what's clear is that building effectively has just replaced what was there before. So it's no less open than it was before those buildings were put in. I guess my understanding of the whole legal situation around Greenbelt is the fact that those houses are now there doesn't change the situation for this particular bit of land. And by the letter of the law, it's Greenbelt, it's harm. The proposals don't provide enough benefit to overcome the harm. I'm not particularly happy about it, but I think we have to reject it.
Okay, thank you. All right, then. So yeah, there's some really good comments there. I think first of all,
yeah, I just would like to speak on this. Just that we're talking about the size of the development, and it's like the number of properties, and we're trying to compare it to the Red Road development across the road, or just down the road, which was far bigger. The amount of 6 or 8 property developments that we would need to anywhere hit our housing supply needs would be enormous. So I don't actually see how a development of 6 houses actually has the slightest impact on our outstanding housing supply, just purely for the fact that you'd need so many of them. So I don't think that holds a great deal of significance from my point of view. And also, I didn't realise Steve Taylor has just said how narrow it is there, but I'm worried about the Greenbelt Creek, because once you've got one built there, then there'll be the bit of land next to it will say, well, actually, there's a development there, and let's have 7 houses. And you end up then with the development of lots of small build outs, where none of them are big enough to give any contributions to the 106 agreements, and evidently this offer of money isn't legal anyway. So I'm just really concerned that it's a creep and it would be, would lead to too many further applications of the same type. I don't think it's appropriate on the green belt. I don't think the number of 6 apartments are substantial enough to have an impact on the 5-year housing supply. So that's my views.
Councillor Byrne, then I'll.
Confusing one. They're saying it's okay to build massively on the green belt already, because that's contributing, but we're taking a hell of a lot of green belt, but a little bit of green belt, we don't want to do it because it's creep. But we've got a hell of a lot of creep and a little bit of creep, so that certainly contradicts what you just said, isn't it?
Okay, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I totally get where you're coming from, but the fact that Red Road happened many years ago before this committee as it sits now, is sitting, and we've got this in front of us. So I understand where you're sitting and how you feel about this, but I listened and took everything into consideration, and it's a bit strange that there's green brownfield that's been built on, wrap around, but once again, completely agree, this is a green belt issue for me, and I just think, look, on this occasion, like Councillor Piplow said, 6 houses are here or there, 6 executive houses, 4-bedroom executive houses for Thurrock people, different matter again, don't believe that. But
Bringing 200 jobs.
I can't, sorry?
Bringing 200 jobs.
200 jobs. Well, I'm not,
Sorry.
I'm not, don't forget about that, I'm just
Okay.
talking about the planning commission. And so, at the end of the day, I feel that I've got to vote against this because it's sitting in the green belt. And I'm really not happy about that, and it will continue to get more and more that Bolford will become a town on its own. Massive one.
Okay, Councillor Pollock.
Thank you, Chair. In the previous application this evening, the town centre, we gave weight to St Margaret's Church, to the heritage, to the impact that that development would have on the heritage. We've clearly got a statement here from our heritage officer that this development will cause harm to heritage. So I also have concerns, again, the piecemeal, the opportunist approaches to, I've got planning permission on that bit. We'll see if we can get planning permission on this bit. You know, we've been subject to piecemeal, poorly planned development in the past. And sometimes, unfortunately, Councillor Byrne, yes, the bigger schemes are more appropriate to the housing needs in Thurrock because we can have more say in the development and the services that are provided with those developments. The continued references to the family involved with the application and their contributions to good works in Thurrock is making me feel a little bit uncomfortable as with the speculative offer of 200,000. I think it is increasingly sounds like jobs for the boys here, which is not sitting well with me. So I support the comments in the report, and I would be minded to go with the recommendation.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Piplow.
Yeah, just quickly. I haven't seen anywhere in the report where it says that the development will supply 200 jobs in the year, which Councillor Byrne referred to a moment ago.
I think every one of them people employ people to bring in control, and the actual resident builders actually employs 18 people in your work. So
That's all
times
right.
that by every build, you're looking at that these people create between 200 and 300 jobs because of bringing in the captains industry, which we've asked for.
Well, they could be captive. They could be captive industry, but already have businesses here and actually just want to move here. So it's all right. I was just a little bit concerned that anyway. That's I'll finish there.
Excellent, thank you. All right, then. Steve,
Yeah, quickly, inappropriate development in the green belt. I think we ought to make a statement that can't just offer us 200 grand and split the development in two. You need to make that statement quite clear to all developers in the future, we're not going to do 6 here and 5 there. You know, let's have the proper development, so, you know,
Okay, thank you for your contribution. So, I think obviously we've had a good debate on this one. Obviously, I think there's passions on both sides. First of all, picking up on a few of your points, Councillor, and so you do add substance with some of the things you're saying. I think local builders, I think you know that means a lot to me when it comes to these sorts of developments. It is something that I'd like to support. Well, I like to support local. When you say sort of Carrot Stick Hospital, I mean, I was part of Red Road. I did it through. Well, when you say Carrot, I would use the term justification. So yes, I did Red Road. It did come with that hospice. That hospice has been built, and I think I can turn around as Gerald Manning and say, yes, I did it, but it come with a much needed hospice, and I've never been there, but I assume that's an absolute lifeline for some people. So. Yeah, I get what you're saying, Carrot, but for me, I like to use the term justification to depart from Greenbelt policy. Steve, you made some interesting comments. I get what you're saying in terms of isolation and location. Having said that, there are people that do live next door, and it seems to work for them. I think when people move there, that they would be aware of that situation. But you do raise some good points as to the isolation. I'm slightly separate in now, I think it's a choice, but yeah, some very good points raised there. I don't like the idea that this isn't too hard. I think I'd like to see it probably a bit more cleaner, that it comes to us in one. I'm not sure whether there's an option in the future for a future sites development. I do actually like it. It's another one of these applications where actually I do like it. I think it's nice, but it does depart from that Greenbelt policy. I know we don't like precedents. I know I won't use that term no more. But I do think again, if we're going to look at a developer like this and say it's acceptable here, in general, if a developer comes to me next month, I think consistency is generally quite important. So that's where the worry comes in. So I won't be supporting the application this evening. I won't be fighting it too hard though. I can understand if you guys wanted to advise the government to keep the green light. I don't think we're heading in that direction. So I've got nothing more to add there. Obviously, there is a recommendation set out on page 93. As I said, it will go to the vote, it gets approved or rejected. I don't think it's the end. I'm not sure whether it could be resubmitted under the future plans date or the future plans application. It would be a bit cleaner, that might help. I'm not really sure I'd vote for it then. So, okay, page 93, recommendation 4.0, I recommend refusal. Is that seconded? There's 3 reasons for refusal there. Seconded by Councillor Fletcher. All those in favour of refusal, please raise your hands. Okay, that's 5 against. All those against the recommendation refusal. That's 2 noes. And any abstentions there?
I seconded it.
Oh, sorry, yeah, sorry, I got that. So that was
I'll
just,
stick the other because you
yeah, no, yeah, sorry. So that was 6-2. So that's 6 against, 2 in favour. Okay then, can you happy with that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right then. So agenda item 9, land adjoining Baldown Farm has been refused. Thank you. All right. So we move on to agenda item 10. Land adjacent to Blackshaw's stadium. Nadia. Thank you.
No, goes the other way. You guys got pen paper?
Matt, it's on Google.
No, that's a presentation.
So it's still on that page. Thank you, Chair. There's a few practical updates before I get into the presentation, just given the nature of this type of application. So the first update is regarding Natural England, and you'll see on the agenda under Natural England's comments, they raised concerns or some outstanding concerns about the back survey data. That current back survey data is awaited by National England. The applicants are winging it across to them as we speak. And so with respect to this recommendation on the recommendation page this evening, the recommendation is therefore made subject to that body raising no objections. It's likely that there will be some standard conditions in relation to bats and lighting, which will need to be included, and members' agreement is therefore sought to include those, subject again to Natural England having no objections and their guidance in relation to that. Other brief amendments to run through, some bits of housekeeping. There are some plan reference changes and date updates to condition 2. There is a very short sentence added referring to a drawing number in condition 6. There's about 8 or so updates like this, so you have to bear with me a little bit. Condition 7 refers to damp-proof course rather than to ground level. Condition 8 omits the words off-site to the title of that condition. These are quite small things, but they've come out through discussions with the applicant since the agenda was printed. Condition 9 includes a plan reference with respect to the proposed footway and cycleway that has been recently received and following discussions with our highways team and the applicants. Condition 22 refers to a plan reference following discussions with our Douglas team. Condition 23 has dropped off the agenda completely. It's no longer required. Sport England have agreed to that. And there's a plan reference change in condition 24 and some other small changes to conditions 30, 31 and 33. These are minor things in relation to the correct plan reference or dates given the changes in discussions all since the agenda was published. In addition to those updates, the council has received five further letters. One is an objection to the proposal for reasons listed in the report already, and there have been 4 letters of support in relation to the application, again for the reasons similar to those listed, supplied by those in support already. One of those 4 letters is from the Rugby Club, and in addition, an email was received late yesterday addressed from the parents of the Orsett Heath Academy, urging the support of the application, which I understand was also sent to the leader and the cabinet member for region and strategic planning and external relationships, Councillor Foxall, as well as other councillors who aren't on this committee, but it's worth bringing that to members' attention. Okay, that said, let's crack on. So this application relates to the proposed Orsett Heath Academy School. And members may well be familiar with the site here on the north and south side of Treetops. So the application site is predominantly to the north of Stamford Road and includes the area immediately south of Stamford Road there, where the word Treetops is. This slide shows an extract from the local plan, and the application site is here. It is located entirely within the green belt and within designated open space. This slide shows the extent of the site. The pink dashed area shows the extent of the proposed Lower Thames Crossing area, which, as you can see, primarily runs parallel to the Stamford Road closest to the application site. The green area adjacent to the Blackshot Stadium is the area indicated for the temporary pitch provision. The area shaded in darker green here shows the new signalised junction that Thurrock Council as the Highway Authority is intending to install. This has been long desired by local residents following concerns regarding access to Treetops School in particular and concerns about running through the Careful Drive estate. The provision of this southern access direct to Treetops will be of benefit, and I believe works are likely to commence on that early in the new year. If planning permission is granted for the current proposals, then a fourth arm to that junction, to that signalised junction, will be included, providing access to the new academy. Here are some images of the immediate area. So this is taken from the Pegasus Bridge on Stamford Road. So it's a view from the Pegasus Bridge looking northeast, with the application site on your left there behind those trees. And a wider tip of the same. And views looking in the other direction, southwest from the same bridge. So you get a good indication of Stamford Road with a site on the right. And on the ground with properties on Stamford Road on the right there. And looking to the southwest with the Pegasus Bridge in the background. The photo from the junction looking at the drive on Stamford Road. And various views from within and around the site. So almost walking you through the site here, this is from the western boundary of the site as you walk into the southwestern corner. And that's this image on the right is part of the southwestern corner of the site. Again, some views generally within the site. Try not to overwhelm members with too many photos because I know lots of what could appear to be similar images, but they aren't in fact. So again, these are views looking northeast within the site, and you can see rugby posts in the right-hand image there. And looking northwards, and in the far distance in the right-hand image, you can see the temporary Dorset Heath Academy School in the distance. We'll get some more photos of that shortly. Views looking eastwards within the site, and northern and eastwards there. And this is the very northern part of the site, looking northwards towards the temporary Dorset Heath Academy and the Rugby Club site. And views looking towards the south and east. And this is a view of the Blackshot Field. Blackshot Field looking south of the stadium immediately on the left. As members may recall, the initial permission for the Dorset Heath Academy being temporarily based at the Rugby Club was granted in February 2019. The school has been operating from there since September 2020. With the rise in pupil numbers, there's a clear need to provide more school places. Permission was granted to open the school at the Rugby Club on this basis, and this application for the permanent school site is a continuation of that same educational need. The proposal is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, but the applicant has provided those very special circumstances that clearly outweigh the harms to the Greenbelt. These are detailed in full in the report, and a table is included on page 152 of your agenda. Here's a broad indicator of the proposed layout, with the main school building roughly J-shaped in the middle there in orange, and centrally located on the northern half of the site. A full-size artificial grass pitch, known as an AGP, and the turf rugby pitch would be provided to the immediate north, with further football pitches to the southern side of Stamford Road. A multi-use games area, so a mugger court, would be provided to the southwestern corner of the site, and the main car park would be to the east. Here's the intended site plan in more detail, showing the main paths, access around the school and landscape areas. The sole vehicular access would be from the new junction to the far eastern end of the site. A new footway and cycleway would also be provided from the west. The main built form on the site would be centrally sited opposite Stamford Road, but would not extend beyond the existing residential development of Stamford Road, which would be acceptable to limit its impact on the Greenbelt. The car park would provide 168 car parking spaces, which would be an over-provision of car parking for the school. The majority of the trees and vegetation bordering the site would be retained, ensuring that the landscaped edge is preserved. There would be some loss of trees and vegetation in order to create the access and highway works at the eastern end, but the vast majority would remain. Here's a slide of the proposed ground floor of the building. The main entrance would be on the eastern side of the building here. The sports hall would be to the northwestern corner, and an activity studio to the northeastern corner. The ground floor would provide all communal facilities, as you might imagine, with the first and second floors providing the classrooms. Here's the proposed first floor, including the classrooms and the highest part of the sports hall. Here's the second floor layout. As you can see, the central part of the proposal would be the only part that would be 3-storey. And here's a floor plan of the actual roof plan of the structure. Here's some elevations of the school building. The principal elevation is the top image here. And this building would have a maximum height of 14.4 metres across the 4 storeys. Pre-application advice was sought from the council, including from the Thurrock Design Review Panel. The panel considered the scheme could be improved in various areas, including the internal and external layouts and arrangements, and the overall sense of place at the site. Many of these concerns have since been addressed within this current application. The building would be of a modern modular construction, featuring traditional brickwork across the ground floor, utilising a darker brick, contrasting with the lighter coloured timber clad upper floors. Feature metal cladding is also proposed to highlight the entrances and to bookend the building. The materials palette proposed is considered acceptable. Whilst the MPPF would encourage a higher quality of detailed design, it is accepted that the applicant is working to strict budget constraints and a time frame for delivering the required school. This tension between the MPPF and the need for the delivery of the school is detailed further in my report, and on balance, given the pressing need for the school places and the government guidance in relation to the construction of new schools, the design can be accepted. Here's a slide of the proposed AGP and turf rugby pitches proposed to the northernmost part of the site. And here's a slide that details just the sports provision. As well as the AGP and full-size rugby pitch, the proposal includes a mugger comprising of 3 courts to the southwestern corner, 6 youth rugby pitches provided at Blackshots, and 4 youth football pitches to the southern half of Stamford Road. The proposal includes full and detailed community use agreements, and the application has the support of Sport England, which has been involved in pre-application discussions from a very early stage. The site is proposed to be secured with 2.4 metre high fencing, which would sit behind the landscaped area and trees on Stamford Road. However, the mugger court would feature a 3 metre high fencing, which would be appropriate given the sports and activities proposed there. Here are some visuals of the intended appearance of the interior of the school, and some visuals of the intended exterior of the school building. So this would be the main entrance and the terrace area to the first floor rear, and views from the pitches to the north, and an overview with properties on Stamford and King Edward being seen in the distance there. So, to summarise, the proposed school would be an appropriate development in the Greenbelt, but the applicant has demonstrated very special circumstances which clearly outweigh the harms caused. The provision of a new secondary school is supported by both local and national planning policies with respect to education provision. The majority of the design considerations have been addressed. The applicant is making an over-provision of car parking and is limited by budget constraints and a national baseline design for schools. Nonetheless, the proposals would fully comply with the Council's energy and sustainability requirements, and the development would provide the school places urgently needed and be of significant wider public benefit. And it's recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, Nadia. Okay then, so we'll open it up to questions. Going to Steve Taylor first, and then Councillor Byrne.
Thanks, Chair. Nadia, that you've just, maybe I missed something when I read the report, but I wasn't aware when I read the report that this side of the road was part of the development. So that kind of, I never picked that up, and I don't know why I didn't, but I didn't because I read it through again this morning. So this is adjacent to Treetops School. And the Lower Thames Crossing boundary you had on, we saw at the edge of it, which was the bit coming along Stamford Road. Where does it turn at the other end?
I'll show you, it's easier if I get it back out.
Thank you.
Everyone.
It's right towards the beginning, wasn't it?
It's one of the first slides.
I would be awkward and ask for the one at the beginning.
It's absolutely fine. So that's
Okay.
the best slide that shows it. So the pink dash line shows the extent of the proposed LTC boundary. And as you can see on the north side of Stamford Road, it kicks in a bit, but effectively runs parallel to Stamford Road. And on the southern side, it actually is even closer to Stamford Road and then broadens out beyond the application site.
So, off the top of your head, roughly, the distance between the red line and the northern line go up.
So
Yeah. So
here, that's
no, go up to the turn, the corner.
There.
No, the corner of the purple line. That's the one I'm on. Yeah. So the distance between there and the red line is roughly what?
Between that there and
No. Sorry,
there and the actual
yes.
there. Gosh.
It's about 100 metres, Steve.
Pardon?
Athletics track. It's about 100 metres.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. You also referred to it as Alsett Heath Academy. When it came in for the original application in 18 or 19, that I was under the impression it was as an extension for William Edwards School.
Just so I'm clear, so just so I can be clear, SWESET, which is the trust that oversees both William Edwards and Alsett Heath Academy, submitted the application for the temporary Alsett Heath Academy school, which is based here.
Okay.
But it is the Alsett Heath Academy, and SWESET are the overarching trust that deal with both schools. Yeah.
Okay, so that explains why I didn't understand that.
And just to pick up your point regarding the LTC boundary, Highways England have been consulted from a very early stage on this, and they've raised no objections with respect to the LTC boundaries and impacts of the proposal.
Okay, and one last question. Access from the northern part of the site to the southern part of the site across that road, how is that affected?
As part of the signalised junction that the council has granted highways consent for, it's proposed that there would be a pedestrian crossing fitted here. You can just see it on the plans there, and the applicant will be providing, within the recommendations, you'll see there is a requirement to provide £20,000 worth of highway improvements contributions, which will help secure that and other alterations to that junction before the school, but they'll cross using that pedestrian access there.
Thank you.
The traffic signals, as part of the traffic signals on the western side, there will be a pedestrian crossing phase on demand. So they will only operate if somebody presses the button.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
They won't operate all the time. Like
No.
most pedestrian signals now on traffic signals are on demand. They're
Yeah,
not
so there's
necessarily
free flow until somebody
Yes.
pushes the button.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the same as the Pegasus Crossing that's lower down on.
Which is the footbridge.
No, the footbridge is not on Pegasus. There's a bit of confusion. The west of the footbridge is a Pegasus Crossing.
Yeah.
Pegasus Crossing is a crossing where horses can also cross, as well as pedestrians and cyclists, and that's why it's called a Pegasus Crossing after the winged.
Yeah. Mobile and all those good things.
That operates in that form at the moment. If somebody presses the button, then it's actuated, but it's not automatically the actual
Doesn't cycle.
infrastructure will assess how the traffic is flowing through the junction and won't automatically just go to red. If there's a number of cars coming through consistently, it will wait for a gap.
Give them a chance to clear some of this.
Exactly, it will wait for a gap appropriate so that children are not necessarily stepping out when the cars are whizzing past, if you see what I mean.
That's helpful.
Yeah, that's how the Pegasus Crossing works. If you stand at that Pegasus Crossing, you can probably stand there for maybe a minute or more while the lights are actually assessing that it's safe to stop the traffic and let the children across, or pedestrians across, or cyclists or cyclists.
Thank you both. Thank you, Chair.
Not yet, if you say, I'm sure you'll get more questions. Councillor Byrne?
Yes, the email we've had from a councillor says they don't think there's enough weight been given to the drop-off and pick-up points. Is that, have you given that enough weight or not enough weight? Can you explain what you're trying to say?
No, I'm happy to, and if Julie, if you wanted to then follow up with something, if I may not have covered it adequately. The proposed drop-off and pick-up in this location is vital. I don't think there's any doubt of that. It's on Stamford Road. We don't want any parents dropping off children on Stamford Road. There is an provision of car parking and a drop-off and pick-up area within that car park. Trying to show, there we go. Actually already proposed within the development. In addition to that, there is a very detailed travel plan that the school has submitted to us, and our travel plan coordinator has reviewed it and made sure it actually does exactly what we want it to do, because that's the last thing we want in this location.
Nigel, do you have, sorry, do you have one question?
No, fine.
Do you have a detailed image of the junction?
With the signalised junction here.
Yeah. Do you have like, would it actually a bit closer? 2 lanes going in, 2 lanes coming out, etc.
I don't think
I so from my recollection, it's 3 lanes either way on the main road. So there's a 3 lanes at the stop line. So there's a right turn lane and 2 straight on lines if you're going west. If you're going east, there'll be a left turn lane and 2 straight on lanes.
If I come out of the school,
there's only one.
Right.
The demand will be, obviously it's a principal route, so the main demand will be on the main road. So if you're coming out of the school, there'll be one, but if you look at the area, that there is a lot of room within that car park for queuing and
sorry, I'm trying to zoom in for your.
Yes, sorry, not here. If you can just,
there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of room within
better?
the car park to hold them.
So if I go in the school,
Yeah.
I can then come out of school and I can go left and I can go right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's you've got.
As you can see, there's 2 lanes, one left, one right.
There's a traffic light system.
Yeah. The whole junction is signalised both into Treetops and into this and it will be into the new school.
And whilst the Treetops is not necessarily part of the access to Treetops, is that part of this application as well?
If I may, yes, the actual red line includes the access to Treetops, which you can see on the image here, running south. It's included within the red line. Those works are already being consented by the Highway Authority, and as I say, they're intending to start on this junction, on this signalised junction, and that southern access in the very new year. So that's happening. That's not in the control of the applicant. It's shown within the red line to show that it has a direct correlation with the provision of the 4th arm, but the works will be undertaken by the Thurrock Council, the Highway Authority, and as I say, it's already been granted with respect to the southern access to Treetops.
Okay, and lastly, that access to Treetops, that doesn't necessarily block off the main entrance to Treetops, or can only parents use this junction now?
No, there is still an existing entrance off Buxton. This, the intention is this would be the principal access. This would be the one that we would want to encourage parents and visitors to Treetops to use, rather than running through the estate. Obviously, people come from different directions to take their children to school. But this has been a long desired objective of local residents, and I'm sure actually parents would prefer this.
Okay, and one last question before I hand over. So if you could zoom out for us. Sorry, I know.
No, I just don't want to stuff anything up with the presentation.
I suppose, yeah, that'll do. So obviously you've got King Edward Drive, so you've got left-hand corner there, you've got Stanford Road, quite easily accessible. I think when it comes to school-run mums and dads, I mean, they're pretty ruthless, to be realistic. I live next to the school.
Yeah.
I was in my kitchen the other day, parked across the drive, and then just went off. So we know they're ruthless in nature. Realistically, if I'm coming up King Edward Drive, I've got two options. I either park on King Edward Drive and drop my kids off, or you're asking me to go left, go off that map all the way up to the roundabout, go for a traffic light, go around the roundabout, come back, potentially go through that traffic light, go all the way up Stanford Road, go into the car park, come out of the car park, go all the way back. It's not going to happen, is it? I bet the only thing that, maybe Councillor Redsall mentioned it, is the only thing I can't get my head around at the moment is it is absolutely going to annihilate King Edward Drive and Stanford Road. That's not to say that you haven't. That's not to say you haven't worked hard to come up with a solution. And ultimately, wherever you put a school, you're going to have these issues. It's just a niggling issue at the moment, and maybe other members can say something, or maybe you can come up with a solution. It's just one outstanding thing. It's going to happen. I know they're going to do it. They're just going to drop them off King Edward Drive. They've got their little crossings there now. And it's just whether that's fair on them. But at the moment, I'll be honest with you, I think we're in big trouble. I can't. We desperately need schools. It is a fantastic project, but at the same time, there's an element of sacrifice there. But let's see what comes up from the debate. Let's see what other questions are asked. I mean, Julian or Nadia, do you guys have to acknowledge that that's going to annihilate King Edward Drive? Or what stops that happening?
I don't necessarily disagree with you that obviously somebody potentially from that sort of area might do, but based on where the current children are actually coming from, that there's not a significant number of children actually come from that area at the moment.
What, through with you and King Edward?
Yeah, the majority are obviously from the west of that. But yeah, there is obviously the potential, but we as Nadia said, as part of that, we have 20,000 for traffic management measures. So if we need to take further restrictions to prevent parking, then we will do so.
As an example of that, what would you? Because I mean, effectively, it's a public road. It works quite well at the moment. There's no double yellow lines anywhere. What could you put in to try and deter parents from doing that? I mean, it's always an awkward one. Because
I've got to be honest. King Edward Drive is pretty wide. I wouldn't be necessarily concerned on the safety grounds if somebody stopped before, say 50 yards from the junction to let their children out the.
No, I'm not really concerned with safety. I'm more worried about impacts on traffic.
I don't. In
terms
terms of what somebody
you've got to drop off. You've also got to park and wait for them to come out of the school.
On Stanford Road.
On Stanford Road,
Stanford Road. We wouldn't want them parking on Stanford Road. I mean, Stanford Road is, as I said, if that did start occurring, then we put restrictions in there to actually prevent that.
What give you an example of restriction?
Well, similar to what we're proposing at 10 Park School, WLLI. I mean, we could technically bring in a clearway if we wanted to. That means no stopping.
Yeah, but then that would affect the residents.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. We've got to be very careful about what we do, because we don't necessarily want to affect those residents that front the Stanford Road as well.
And then one last question, and sorry, I'll hand over. You've got that one access. Obviously, the rugby club effectively is moulded onto this. But it seems like it's almost blocked off on this application. It's like it's almost fenced off. I would have thought, one, the rugby club would have been a bit more integrated in the design, i.e. easy access. And two, there's obviously references to the teachers might be able to park there. And let's be realistic again, you're going to have parents parking down next to the rugby club. It's almost like I wondered whether encouraging different type of access might alleviate issues in terms of growth. So what was, I mean, I assume the stance is we don't want them to, we don't want them going anywhere near north of the rugby club to drop the kids off.
Okay, well, I can answer from a planning perspective, but certainly there are several issues here. Firstly, the rugby club is not within the red line, it's not within the control of the applicant, and indeed this is the defined area that the applicant chose to submit the application. The existing first phase of the school, or the temporary setup of the school at the rugby club in 2019 was submitted as, with the intention was that it would be leaving a sporting and educational legacy for both the use of the Alston Heath Academy and the wider trust schools and the rugby club. So those buildings that have gone up in relation to the first step of the school there, so I reread the committee report this evening. For that actually specifically states that was the intention, and it would be used, and indeed there's a community use agreement associated with that application and permission that actually sets that up. So it's a separate entity, a separate site, but with a link through the schools and through the rugby club, and particularly in conjunction with all activities proposed with the Alston Heath Academy. And in terms of the physical link you refer to, there is a gate at the moment. It's just indicated there between the school, the temporary school site, and the proposed permanent site. And so there is a physical link between there to those pitches and the future use of the pitches between the first phase of this permanent site. And yes, the applicant indicates that there may be some staff parking that could occur in the car park area to the north of the site. And indeed, there's footpaths coming down from this area at the moment. I walked that myself when I had a good look at the site, that you may well get parents and children using, or if staff wants to do that, but that is outside of the red line of the site. And indeed, the car parking provision of the site is double what our policies require. So there would be no policy requirement to have any staff parking or any other parking elsewhere. And this is the access arrangement that we have recommended as both Thurrock Council and the Highway Authority as the appropriate way forward.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'll hand over to other members now, and obviously it's past 8, so I'll suspend standing orders. Are we happy to carry on to 9:30? Yeah?
Agreed.
Thank you. All right then, so, sorry, I saw Councillor Fletcher's hand up. Did anyone else have their hand up?
Piccolo,
Councillor Piccolo, okay, Councillor Piccolo.
Just quickly, if you could just zoom into where the entrance is, where you said there was going to be, someone said there was going to be 3 lanes in each direction? No, that's it. Down.
Yeah, I'm just.
Oh.
Apologies, I can't.
You can just about see the 3 lanes at the stop line.
We move it over. We have to move out.
So is that a filter line down?
It's not a filter lane, it's a left turn lane.
So,
Well, no, it's just, so there's going to be 3 lanes in both directions at that access point.
Yeah.
And where does it narrow back down to 1? Because at the moment it's 1 lane, isn't it?
It is one, well, yeah, it's 1 lane, but the road is slightly wider than 1 lane at the moment.
Well, but it's not 2 lanes.
No.
So what I'm saying,
There will be a local widening around the traffic signals, so at the traffic signals will at the stop line, there will be 3.
I'm just.
Well, you can see it there, about there where that hatching is, it's starting to widen out to 2 lanes and then goes to 3 lanes.
Yeah.
Well done, Marty.
No, I'm just concerned that where you get that sudden narrowing from 3, well, like, technically it'll only be 2 because the 3rd lane is going to be used in and out of the school.
Yeah.
But you get that bottleneck where there's a rat run, who takes priority to get into the 1 lane. It's not wide enough to do.
There's plenty of merge distance after, there's 2 lanes after the signal stop.
Yeah, but where it goes from 2 into 1.
Yeah, but it must be 100 or more yards up the road, so there's plenty of merge distance.
Yeah, I'm just a little bit concerned because once there is, you say there's enough work merge distance, but
Well,
unfortunately.
if you look at some standard signals, you'll have 2 lanes and it'll merge straight into one on the opposite side of the junction. So that's
Yeah.
well in excess of what you would have on plenty of
I
particular.
won't make a point, it's just that it shouldn't be, but it's a reasonably fast open road. I can understand where it narrows down in the town centre. Anyway,
As part of the
I'll ask you a
traffic
question.
management measures, we can look at reducing the speed limit along that particular section, because obviously now you've got built up on the opposite side of the road. So technically within the law says if you look at the way it used to work, if it's built up on only on one side of the road, technically you could only have a 40-mile-an-hour limit. Whereas this is now built up on the second side of the road and there's a school there, we can probably justify putting in a 30-mile-an-hour limit along that section, which in terms of going even further down the road, in terms of the Pegasus Crossing and going towards the Dane Holes roundabout, would make that whole section potentially 30-mile-an-hour and a lot safer.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, then, Councillor Fletcher, then Councillor Holly.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to go back to the Rugby Club a second, Nadia. You mentioned in the preamble about point 23 about the Thurrock Rugby Club licence. That isn't going to be required. What does that actually mean for the Rugby Club?
Okay, so I just want to actually show you where we are. That's probably the better plan that shows the land in question. This was outside of the red line, outside of the application site, so it's this green bordered area here, to the immediate flank of the stadium. The proposal, obviously, is proposing to build a school on, build form on what is currently some open space and involve some redistribution of pitches. Whilst that construction phase is happening, there is still a need to have adequate rugby pitches for both the use of the rugby club and ultimately the school. This is a temporary phasing thing, and a lot is slightly unknown with respect to the Lower Thames Crossing projections in the future. But the council owns this land where the Blackshots fields are, and has negotiated a 10-year licence with the rugby club to ensure that that area in green is maintained and provided for rugby football provision. And that's for a period of 10 years. It may well not be, they may well not be needed for that long. It may be 5, 6 or 7, but that's a provision with respect to that the council has agreed with the rugby club. In terms of how it impacts upon the school, they will be used also by the school as part of its overall sports provision, and will be included with any community use agreement. And we felt confident including that, given the fact that we can control the land as landowner there.
The reason I ask is because I know the original bone of contention between the club and the planners for the school was that you have 3 rugby pitches in front of the what will become the clubhouse, but some of these in particular with your minis and juniors, you need a lot more space than that. I think initially there is a degree of concern over what would happen to that land to the south of those 3 pitches. So if I understand it rightly, that problem's been resolved for possibly the next 10 years.
It's been resolved in that these will be the youth rugby pitches you're referring to here. And so whilst there is that future concern about the LTC, we know that they'll be provided for here.
Great.
And there'll be no loss of any sports provision. And the reason in referring to condition 23, we don't need that condition. It has to meet all of the tests. Now we've got the licence, there is no requirement that the council can impose that. And indeed, Sport England have requested we also drop it because there's just no need for it now. If they're happy.
Thank you.
Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair. So the sports pitches on the access road to Treetops there, is there buildings on there? Or?
No, this is existing open space at the moment, and it's proposed to be used for football pitches. So, the use
no
of the
changing rooms, no,
there's no built form proposed at all.
I just have a concern that we've talked about traffic as in vehicle movements, people going to school, but excited youngsters that are playing football and that then waiting for Pegasus Crossing to go across the road because they need the loo or they need to get changed because they're going up. I mean, would a bridge or something like not been more of a consideration?
In an ideal world, yes, a footbridge, but if you look at the space that the footbridge actually takes up down the road, it's a significant part and they cost a significant amount of money. As part of the management part of putting the signals in, the school will be asked to manage how their children actually cross the road during sports during those sports facilities. I understand it, but you know that is the situation. One would hope that when they go taken across there, they're not just told to make their own way across, that it is supervised in terms of their crossing facilities. If not, then I suspect our road safety officer who runs their travel plan, so their travel plan is run through our road safety officer, will probably insist that if they're not doing that, that they will do it.
And in addition, with discussion with the applicants at pre-app stage and with our highway engineers, it was considered appropriate to increase the standing area for any pupils who may be waiting to cross. So there is a provision for clear waiting for any pupils or any kids while they're waiting to cross the road to make sure they're obviously clear of any hazard at all.
And sorry, do we know? They obviously will want optimum return on these, so these will be sort of 12 hours. Will they? Like the pitches will be available for hire outside of school times. And
there is a community use agreement that's being discussed with Sport England, and Sport England have been very particular about their key principles they want included in that to ensure that access to all of the sports facilities can be made available for that local community, to the local community. Obviously not during the school time.
So then you've got neighbour issues there, haven't you? Because those houses at the moment have got open green space next to them. They're going to be delivered floodlit pitches that are in use.
There is no floodlighting proposed on that southern side.
Yeah.
So just so you're aware of that, but understandably, if there is a change in the nature of the use of that southern portion from, you know, open recreational space to youth football or anything like that, as well as PE lessons and so on, then that would have an impact on those neighbours. And indeed, our environmental health officer flagged that up in their response, and there are conditions relating to noise with particular consideration of that southern side included in the recommendation for members.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Julian, probably for you. Sorry.
It's all right.
Slightly. So my concern is I'm a bit in the same camp as Councillor Kelly in that I live near a school. Now this school will fill up by next, not this academic, the next time it will be open. And it wouldn't surprise me that we've got 240 pupils at the moment, but this school is capable of 1,200 pupils, including, so at 8:30 and at 2:30, 2:45, you're going to have so much traffic down there for 1,200 pupils plus Treetops. So are you absolutely confident that what you're telling us that you've put in line for the restrictions and everything else, that will be able to cope? I would say out of 12,000 people, let's be generous, 900, 800 cars hitting that road at one go, as without Treetops as well being there.
I think you're looking at it ideologically. 900 children in cars won't all turn up at the same time.
Okay.
They're all come at different times.
Quarter past and half past.
Okay. In terms of the assessment, in terms of how the signalised assessment has been looked at, the assessment has been done, and the signals will cope with the amount of traffic. both going through and into the school. In terms of the traffic management, we haven't decided on the traffic management yet, because it's inappropriate at the moment to put something, say this is going to happen when it might not. If it does happen, then we have the money within our budget to then potentially put in the restrictions that are suitable, because obviously we would need to liaise with local residents. As I said, theoretically we could put in a clearway, but that just stops that means nobody can actually stop on the road or those sections. But obviously that significantly impacts on residents on Stamford Road. So whatever needs to be put in if the problem occurs, and we can't say a problem occurs until it actually does. I mean, there is the amount of room within the school in terms of the parking and the stacking room within is significant. If you look at the Thames Park School compared to this school, this is double the parking and more stacking room within the school. So in terms of the impact, we're hoping that it won't be that significant. If there are parking problems, then we will deal with it under traffic management. But it's wrong to come in, ham-fisted and say there is going to be a problem when we don't know whether till it is actually operating to its full capacity, that there is going to be a problem. Because in a few years' time, we may not be all driving our children to school.
Yeah, right.
Unfortunately, you've got to look at it from a transport point of view. And at the moment, we're trying to encourage people to use alternative. This is why we're putting in improving the cycle facilities to get to the school from the west. We have to try and encourage children to use different modes of transport. And if we automatically assume that every child comes to school by car, then we're already losing the battle before we start.
So Jim, absolutely agree with you. Reality is not there yet.
No, I agree with you. I live near a school. I know what it's like, but compared to the amount of room within this school, and the school that I live near has got facilities where they can come in. This is a significant amount more than that school. But I don't disagree with you, potentially, but we can't resolve a problem until it actually occurs.
I think the case studies for that is every single secondary school in Thurrock. You need to look at like Ockington Academy is opposite Beacon, and it's crazy. The new Perfect Riverside, great parking facilities in there, nuts. So, the reality is we know that, but I'm just saying, you're saying, we know about the transport plans, but we just need to be absolutely clear that it can cope. And we just have to wait and see.
In terms of the traffic impact at the moment, we've looked at it, it can cope with it when it first opens and when it goes on to full capacity.
Can I, sorry, before my colleague next to me, and start shouting at me. Would like to be. Can I ask one more thing about the mugger? Okay, so the mugger you're saying can be used for community use. However, there is things happening in this borough where it is for community use when the school's finished with it. So if the school's doing after school clubs and Saturdays and Sundays, it's not really going to be used for community use. So is there anything we can do to say to the school to try and restrict that slightly so it becomes community use? Like encourage companies with football or rugby or whatever to be able to use that area, not that just monopolised just for the whole entire school and then it doesn't become community use.
I understand completely where you're coming from. Someone who's got young children who do a lot of sport, I get that, and there's a lot of pressure, isn't there, to get access to those facilities when there's only so many to go around. As I say, I can only reiterate the really tight wording we've managed to agree with the applicant, with Sport England for that community use agreement. Sport England wanted all of its key principles met in that condition. Which is in your recommendation. I haven't got it to hand, but it is, as I said, it's the CUA condition. So that will be something that we will be very strict on, and in fact, Sport England want to agree within the discharge of that condition anyway. So I have those similar concerns. It is vital that they're actually all met. With respect to the concerns about traffic and parking, I agree with what's being said, and you know, the level of traffic data that's been submitted with the application has satisfied the highway engineers, and there has been such a lot of close collaboration with respect to the design of this signalised junction and the impact of traffic that I think, you know, I professionally, I feel rest assured that that's been really carefully considered. And I think alongside that, if you look at the travel plan condition, that's a living document. Once that is agreed, subject to permission, and the agreement of that condition by our travel plan coordinator, that's a living document that's annually reviewed. So if there is evidence of more parents driving or more, you know, bad practice by parents that happens around schools, then we'll have the ability to address that within that condition, as will the school, on annual reviews, and we'll hear about it, absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Watson. Yeah, I've got quite a few hands up. Just picking up on Councillor Watson's point there. So, I mean, look, ultimately, you're going to have a lot of children travel to school by bus. So I assume there's going to be a facility for buses to go in and out of that junction. I suppose another thing that sort of stands out is if you do have the Thames school currently being built, you have this school, you have William Edwards. So obviously it's fantastic we're getting those secondary school places. If you sort of have them in that sort of close proximity, which they are, it does generally suggest that the youngsters are going to be coming from far and wide because the placement of the schools are in such a narrow area. So, I mean, I would have thought you would have a rough idea on cars. So I don't know what the numbers are going to be, but I would have thought from your traffic modelling you would have had a rough idea. And then there was a suggestion here that when the modelling data was done, one of the local schools was closed. That was just one of them. I don't know how true that is. A resident emailed today and said on the day, so your Borough Council data, traffic model data, Treetops was closed. I mean, is there any comments on that, do you think, or are you not sure? Or?
I wasn't aware that it was.
Well, I don't know if that's true or not. I'm only going by what the email said, but rough number on cars, I'm not sure, am
I don't know those figures, no.
Right. Okay, right, so we've got quite a few hands up here. Councillor Nicholas.
Yeah, I used to live in Long Lane, which is a couple of hundred yards from the site, and my guess is that an awful lot of drivers will be coming up Long Lane and down into the Rugby Club Road or 2 or 3 roads just north and west of the site, where the high-rise buildings are. There's a walk through, and possibly even into Blackshot's swimming pool car park, because these kids are sort of 11 to 17 or whatever, and they'll be walking through. Just a warning that will be a preferred route for an awful lot of people, and you know, just be advised that that will cause some problems. So
again, it's something that can be managed, but in terms of people are using more than one space to actually come into the school, say in Blackshot's car park. If Blackshot's car park is not significantly full, then I don't see a significant issue in parents dropping them off, because that means they can walk through the park to the school, and that's one car off the road coming down towards the junction. So you know, if
just something to be aware of. Yeah. It could be a good thing.
Yeah,
like
most things, there's advantages and disadvantages, and you know, if there are disadvantages, then we'll have to look at those and obviously bring in appropriate measures if we need to.
But I also think actually, Chair, that where we have several footpaths to the west, as Councillor Chairman indicated, one coming down from Blackshot's, the Thurrock Design Review Panel encouraged the use of those with respect to encouraging more children to walk or cycle to school. And indeed, the applicant is providing, you know, an area of footway and cycleway from the west that would be entirely to encourage that kind of activity.
The other point was you mentioned 2.4 metre railings around the school. Is that right the way round the red points, or is that,
The easiest way
because
for me to do
they
it is to
look
show you.
horrendous?
It's 2.4 fine fencing. It's the type you see on schools.
Well,
I can give you, that sounds a bit of a silly description, but it sits behind that landscape strip. It's within.
Right, so
So-
it's not the wide palings?
No, it's not
Well,
landscape
well
fencing.
dimensioned.
No,
Well
apparently it's
dimensioned.
really fine.
It's called
Yeah.
well
That's
dimensioned, well,
okay,
it's
yeah.
quite close.
Yeah.
So you can't see through it at an angle. It is that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
I'm assuming it's a dark colour as well.
Yeah, we haven't agreed the colour, but it would be along the lines of a dark green or some other, yeah.
But it's the stuff that if you're looking square, you can see through it.
Yeah.
But if you're at an angle,
Yeah,
you can't.
yeah, close.
Yeah, it's quite close lines within it.
Okay, right, I've got Councillor Fletcher Piccolo, then Howard. Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks. Just a question. So yes, it makes sense that we try and reduce the pressure on the roads by encouraging things like cycling. Will there be an entrance from Blackshots Park to? If you're going to have people cycling in, it would be ideal if they don't have to come down onto the road and then.
Yes, there is. There are two entrances, one here and
Brilliant.
one here.
Okay, thank you. And just as an extra, there seems to be some degree of surprise that we're spending as much time as we are on the road things. Without being facetious, it is because the downside of not getting this straight is kids getting knocked down by cars. And I have to say, when you're saying, well, you know, let's not presume a problem, for me, the art of good planning is to be prepared for the worst. So I would rather not just, I think the phrase was deal with the problem when it happens. I would rather we were actually looking at the potential issues.
I'm talking about in a traffic management of parking point of view. In terms of looking at the children's safety, we've got signalised crossing, we've improved the cycle facilities to the school for the children to get from the west. We've looked at the other crossing facilities that there. You've got the footbridge, you've got the Pegasus Crossing, we've looked at the other crossing, the uncontrolled crossing. We've looked at that in terms of potential children numbers and whether there would be an issue with too many children trying to cross at the same time. Those have all been reviewed and we're happy in none of those in that respect. I agree with you, but we didn't particularly want to say that we put double yellow lines everywhere to begin with. As I said, one of the things we will be looking at is lowering the speed limit. Yeah. So that will be a traffic management thing that we will be bringing in from the start. It won't be reactive. But obviously, some of the parking restrictions might have to be reactive because obviously, Councillor Kelly talked about potentially you can give a drive. If that's where the problem's going to be, then obviously we need to look at that. If the problem's going to be up in off of Long Lane and the roads up a Long Lane, then we may need to look at that. If a problem occurs on Stamford Road, then we may need to look at that. So yes, I agree with you. It's not totally, we're not totally reactive, but we can't. As I said, in terms of the parking, we've got to look at it once it's if there is a problem that we're reacting to that problem. But in terms of other things in children's safety, we've looked at that and then said in terms of speed limit, we will be reducing, trying to reduce that.
Because I would be more reassured to feel that yes, we've looked at these possible risks and we have things in place to deal with. Just one more question. So obviously we've got this junction, quite sort of fine-looking junction up by the entrance of the school. If you're coming from the east, the northeast, presumably you're going to have to come down to the Daneholt roundabout and come round. Have we looked at all of the potential, admittedly only twice a day, but the potential impact on what is already quite a busy junction at Daneholt? Because I'm assuming you have to come down, round, and back up.
We've looked at that in terms of the assessment that the applicant's done. So they've assessed not just that junction, they've assessed all the junctions in the local area, including the Daneholt roundabout and even the traffic lights further on Lodge Lane at the South End Road. So we've been quite extensive in terms of where we've looked at and and the traffic impact in terms of, and we're happy in that respect in terms of the traffic impact in those places.
And in addition, Chair, the siting and the detailed design of the council's signalised junction was carefully considered, and that was considered and, as I say, granted consent before the application has come before you tonight. So I know that the actual siting in relation to the roundabout to the southwest and how it would work has all been very carefully assessed and reviewed by the Thurrock Council transport engineers, who were a separate hat entirely from Julian and his team.
Thank you. Okay, right, I've got 3 more questions and then hands up, and then we'll go to speaker statements. Next was Councillor Pickard.
Hello, just quickly, regarding the buses. What's the catchment area? I mean, are there likely to be quite a number of those pupils coming in by school bus, which obviously would reduce the number of cars using that entrance? So there's quite a lot of secondary school provisioning generally, but are we anticipating a lot of the pupils being bused in? Because that would just reduce the problems with the cars.
Julian may have the figures more to hand. I've got no paperwork immediately in front of me, but I from recollection from previous discussions on this, the majority would be considered to come in by bus and foot and cycle, which you know, may be a surprise to members given previous conversations, but they're intending to come more from the west of the site. Julian may have those.
Yeah, no, it just that I assume there would be some bus travel, and
yeah,
obviously that could make quite a substantial difference to the amount of vehicles trying to use and access the site.
And indeed, the immediate area is served by half a dozen different routes,
As well, on the
including the
buses,
bus routes.
yeah.
Absolutely, and
Okay.
the report picks those up.
Yeah.
So I've got, I think I'm just looking at the estimated trip generations to the school. So I've just brought up their travel plan. So if the school opened today, in terms of their mode share, looking at the current mode share in terms of the schools in the area, so obviously we look at schools in the area, potentially 204 children would walk to school, 98 would cycle, there'd be about 123 car journeys, 21 car share, so that's on top of the 123, 25 park and stride, 4 by taxi, none by bus, and 4 by scooter.
Where the bus is coming from?
As far as I'm aware, if I'm not mistaken, they're not intending to have any buses, only not as in, say, St Clair's and whatever it is. But you've got to remember, places like St Clair's, the children are being bused from East Tilbury, so that there isn't an opportunity to walk from East Tilbury or get other forms of transport.
Yeah, sure.
You could get the train. Some children do. I know some of the children do get the train, and I believe we also bus children in from this part of the borough to places like St Clair's. So the buses are not just coming from, but there will be no buses. In terms of the expected trips, okay, in 2026, I think the school is opening in 23. So we're talking about 500 children potentially walking to school, 200 going by cycle, about 300 vehicles, so not 900 vehicles, 53 car shares, so that makes about 350 cars, 64 park and stride, so we're talking about parking somewhere else around, like bike shops and walking to school, 11 by taxi, none by bus, and 11 by scooter, though obviously, as you were at the moment, scooters are not actually permitted on the footways. But that looking at their predicted, from looking at other schools in the area, in the way children come to school, that's what we're talking about potentially. Does that help?
Yeah,
To your previous question?
yeah, it gives us a bit of better understanding. Obviously.
So not a significant amount of vehicles as you're potentially thinking about.
No, I mean, in terms of flow of traffic, you going to have issues with the traffic lights, aren't you? Because you've got 500 kids walking. We have a lot of
They're
light
not,
issues.
they're not going to be crossing at that crossing. They'll be crossing, most of the children are coming from west of the school. There's only a small catchment that comes potentially from Orset Heath or from Orset. Most of the children will be coming, and they will come in at the west part of the school. They won't be walking up to the
Joe,
train.
you've got a traffic light west of the school, haven't you, near the bridge?
You've got the Pegasus Crossing.
And that's not really used a lot of time, is it?
No,
It will be.
it's not, but I mean, there are other opportunities to cross. So you've got the footbridge, and then you've got uncontrolled crossings.
So, Chair, point of order, I'm very conscious of the fact this meeting's guilty in 42 minutes. We've got 3 speaker statements.
But,
I think it's going to be really discourteous if we send parents and children away not knowing what we're going to do tonight. So I really think we need to make progress with the speaker statements. But
Well, yeah, we can, but I think the problem is there's always been difficult situations, like in the back of the ministry.
yeah, I appreciate that.
We can't rush the decision. But yeah, we'll go to the speaker statements and we'll see where we end up, but it is what it is, it's going to take time. That school is huge, it's going to have huge impact.
No, I
think it's
appreciate
really
that, but quite a few of these points are actually
right,
in full.
so, yeah, all right, well, look, hands are up. I mean, you was the next question. Did you want to talk?
No, I'm just trying to move things on.
But you want your question?
Councillor Burns, do you want to ask a question?
Yes. We look at the car on this side, and a lot of people saying there's problems, and you're saying, well, there's a problem, we'll sort it later. Don't worry about it. But if you ask any head, any teacher, any parent, we don't do it. Every school in Thurrock would say, you don't do it, we don't look at something after, we don't take no notice. We haven't got any more to do it, we don't protect it, we don't put police into it. So we've got to get this right now, because if there is a problem, as people are saying, you won't solve it because you don't do it. The proof is, you can say as many words as you like, but we don't look at it afterwards. We let it go, we don't release it, we don't do anything. So they're just empty words.
I'm quite happy if members consider that we put the weighting restrictions.
You're saying something happens that don't actually, you won't look at it afterwards.
As part of this application, to include that within the section 278 works for the site. So we can include, if members feel that they want some restrictions right from the start, then we can include those right from the beginning, if that's what members feel would be appropriate.
Worry about like when 10 kids are like, we can't sell them.
Okay, you've got to remember also that obviously it's a TRO process which is up for debate and objection, and if people object, then obviously it's not necessarily just because we're proposing something, it's not necessarily a foregone conclusion. So that's what I'm saying. You know, that's why I'm saying in some instances it may be worth waiting in certain instances to see if there is a problem in certain areas, and then not sort of blanketing the area, because obviously local residents might go, hold on a minute, there isn't actually a problem yet, and you're already assuming there's going to be a problem, and you're putting something in, so you may get loads of objections because people are you're trying to foresee a problem. That it's better to say, okay, maybe outside, you know, the junction, we put a few restrictions in that local area, but areas like Geneva Drive and Long Lane and those areas, we wait a bit to see whether there is going to be a problem in those areas, because obviously that's going to impact on the residents themselves.
All right, let's move on to the speaker statements. First of all, I've got a statement of objection from Mike Campbell, so local residents. Mike, please, Mike, did you want to just come down and sit to our right? And you've got 3 minutes each to represent your speaker statement. Thank you, and I understand your statement of objection. Thank you. Yes, please, thank you.
I live in Geneva Drive. I'm also a member of the club for the last 45 years, but I speak some knowledge. I'm concerned that Thurrock Council over the last decade has opposed the building of the Pegasus Crossing, as it will increase traffic pollution in the area and will endanger the health of residents and children of residents. By supporting the position of a school within the horseshoe of the Pegasus Crossing, A13, Dock Approach Road, Stanford Road, all major roads spewing out toxic traffic pollution. It is a contradiction of this opposition that you've held before. The Corners Court decision that traffic pollution contributes to the death of a 9-year-old child She made her way to and from school as a warning to local authorities. Stamford Road is a different road from what I'm hearing in here tonight. It's the main route across the borough. During peak periods, there is continuous flow of traffic in both directions, and additional traffic control, which is not necessary now, will create traffic problems for residents trying to get to and from work and going about their business. We know that problems on the A13, M25 and Thurrock Crossing spill onto this road. It's an escape route. It would be dangerous to expose this road to the irresponsible and aggressive parking that we all know will take place as children are dropped off and picked up. There are no special circumstances to support the building of the school on this greenbelt land. The area is well served by education facilities, and within 1 mile of this site there are 4 secondary schools, and one is just being built at the bottom of King Edward Drive at this moment. 6 form college, a special needs school, and 6 primary schools. Building of the temporary classrooms, which I'm not sure of the financial status, but I believe it was financed by the council at Thurrock Rugby Club. This is a manufactured situation and cannot be a special circumstance. It was to relieve a critical shortage of school places in all of Thurrock for September 2019 intake. It was not completed on time and people replaced in existing schools. It is beyond my understanding as to how building isolated temporary classrooms in Blackshots is going to resolve the borough-wide problem. This is not phase 1 of this application, but a stand-alone solution that has backfired. The Academy Trust claimed if it did not go ahead in 2019, it would have catastrophic consequences for Thurrock. By using existing schools, this catastrophe did not materialise, and my understanding is that any costs were met by the council, but this was in addition to the rumoured £3 million to pay for the classrooms at the rugby club, as that went ahead despite playing no part in resolving the crisis of 2019. Naming this isolated temporary classroom as Bossehead Academy and putting selected pupils in temporary classrooms in 2020, which is over a year before this planning application had been made, is quite alarming. It was quite obvious then that it would take a considerable time to complete the design and planning process and then build the school. On the Academy Trust website, the brochure says it will not be completed until 2024. Some of the current pupils will have a minimum of 3 years of a secondary education in a building that's totally devoid of facilities necessary to take classes at secondary school. Planning Officer's report on the current application refers to the temporary classrooms as phase 1. Now, I'm not sure what the status of this school is at the moment, or classrooms. It was financed by the council, so it's not part of the free school programme, and I don't know how it's regulated. It's not without good reason I see this whole scenario as a blatant and a deliberate action to influence this application. There's no other feasible explanation. It's a completely manufactured and serious fraud situation, not therefore special circumstances that would allow an inappropriate building in Greenbelt. It would be wrong in principle for this to be given credit as leverage in favour of this application. I believe that this application should be set aside until the reasons concerning the long-term use of these temporary classrooms as a secondary school is resolved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Mr. Gamble. Okay, I'll then bring the local ward councillor forwards. Joy, if you'd like to come here for 3 minutes in which to sit there, speak up nice and clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. First time I'll say we've had a good debate. I wish I'd have been on it. It's just, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Chair, but just to say that it's been a long time talking with Treetops as well, and as Treetops has been mentioned tonight, we had a lot of talking with Treetops to make sure they had drop-off and pick-up times, because in the end we are going to close Buxton Road, which will alleviate a lot of traffic off of King Edward Drive. So I think we've worked hard with that, and we've worked hard with the new school that may be coming. That's why we've got the crossing at the top of Stamford Road. I think it was a good thing that somebody brought in the 30-mile limit, because I think as you've got things on either side of the road, I think that will alleviate. Thanks for allowing me to speak, Chair. As councillors, we've just got a slight concern that in the agenda, not enough weight has been given to the drop-off and pick-up points. We have only got to this point because we've taken place in the lead up to this. We've had lots of talks with the schools to lead up to this application. It's not that we as local councillors have just left everything alone. We have had many talks. The school has been very open with the residents and involved everybody. Without this openness, I don't think we'd be where we are now. It has to be part of the application and not a condition. We have seen so many applications over the years for schools where the conditions have not been adhered to, and I mean with Woodside, they were given a condition which they've never adhered to, and he won't let them in the school. So that is something we have got enforcement on at the moment. The Woodside area has been blighted for many years with existing schools. The new junction, which will be funded by Thurrock Council, is very welcome. The pick-up and drop-off points need to be within the school. Every effort has to be made to stop parents from using the existing roads. And as the Chair brought up a little while ago, people are going to use King Edward Drive, and we don't want that. I would hope that the committee put this at the forefront of its deliberations. We're not going to stop cars travelling to the school, because however much we feel that we want to, it isn't going to happen. So everything has to be done to bring this to fruition properly. The site may not be ideal, but no other site has been identified, and we need the school in the area. I just want to make a point. I would also like that in Blackshots at the moment, in my ward and Councillor Maney's, we're going to have 6 schools, which means that we've already got problems. And as Councillor Lydiard said in his question, the only way to get into that new school is down Long Lane. There aren't any other roads to get in, but that is a way that people are using it now, and they may think that they can get in that way. We haven't got a problem there at the moment, but Blackshots Lane has. Because as somebody else mentioned the other day about catchment areas, I'm not too happy about catchment areas because they don't work. You know, there is no catchment. Years ago, we all used to walk to school, and we don't do that now. And that's that is the big part of what's causing all the problems in our schools at the moment, because children are not walking from where they live. So that is causing the problems. And as I said before, we've worked hard with Treetops in the same way. And I want this to be written in stone that it has to be drop off and pick up for going into the school. So thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me to speak.
Okay, thank you. And that takes us on to our last speaker statement, which is a statement of support from Steve Monday, as CEO of South West Essex Community Education Trust. Steve.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the planning committee. I'm understandably delighted to be here this evening to support the Council's education infrastructure project. In the 5 years following approval by the Department of Education, time has been spent diligently developing the very best scheme possible, following extensive and constructive dialogue with both planning, highways, other officers, ward councillors and wider stakeholders. This comprehensive consultation has ensured that the scheme maximises the widest possible community benefit for this enormous capital investment in Thurrock young people. Having worked in Thurrock schools for over 20 years, like many families, I'm acutely aware of the increasing pressure on school places. In recent years, we've seen most Thurrock secondary schools pushed above their intended capacity, including William Edwards and so on Trust, as has been mentioned, currently accommodating 1,250 pupils in a building originally intended for 800. Most secondary schools in the borough have taken bold year groups, including some that have taken more than 100 pupils over their admission number. As housing development continues at pace and the local plan comes to fruition, the need for school places and new school places will grow further still. Following the successful pre-opening inspection by Ofsted, the regulator, and with full regulatory approval by the Department of Education, also the Academy opened for full initial cohort of 120 pupils in September 2020, despite the challenges of the pandemic. And a second full cohort of 120 joined in September 21. Applications for September 22 are high still. Water is one of the few new schools in the country approved and funded by the Department for Education to immediately fill up, clearly evidencing the quality of offer in place and the need for the main site development. The proposed location adjacent to the interim school at Thurrock Rugby Club has seen our strong and innovative partnership strengthen. The scheme brings exceptional community facility enhancement, including a high specification in terms of grass pitch. Only 2 other facilities of this specification exist in the east of England. Further links with the Harriers, also Cricket Club, Impulse Leisure, Grays Athletic and other local clubs will ensure pupils and the wider community gain maximum benefit from this optimum location. I would suggest at the heart of a North Grays sports hub. The proposed 160 parking spaces and large flow capacity will be greater than any other school in the borough, and that's really, really important for the reasons that have already been discussed. The existing partnership parking at Thurrock Rugby Club, in addition, where some staff will continue to park, mean that the traffic capacity and reality of the proposed main site will be even greater still. Crucially, it means for those parents who need to drop off their children by car, and the modelling of existing pupils demonstrates that is at 35%. Getting off the highway will be the safest and easiest way to do it. Multiple pedestrian entrances, routes into the school will also mean that, coupled with the staggered start times that will be significant and extensive covered bike sheds, there will not be the congestion seen at the schools during drop-off and pick-up. The new junction will provide excellent access to Walsall Heath and, importantly, as has been pointed out, Treetops School. And I think it's crucial to emphasise what Councillor has just said in relation to the closing of the existing entrance. We listened very carefully at the last planning meeting that I attended when I was in this chamber and have acted on that in relation to removing the entrance. I should also point out that the provision of fields to the south physical fixtures and community zoning and the most used during curriculum timeline. I absolutely understand that there will be a concern that children will be moving across during the day. That will not be the case. It's purely for fixtures and for community use. The curricular free will happen in the north on the AGP and the existing field. In respect to the objectives comment regarding pollution, the full air quality assessment was submitted with the application. And the Council's Environmental Health Officer has no objection in relation to air quality. In conclusion, the time taken to develop this scheme was yielded an exceptional proposal that exceeds expectations in most areas. Speaking on behalf of the 240 children and families already attending school and thousands more families across the borough, I recommend it to you unreservedly, as you would expect.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll go through the statements. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Byrne.
I'll answer Councillor Redstall's questions. Oh, okay.
Councillor Fletcher.
I do have one question, and I'm sure there's an innocent answer, but I was a little perturbed that Mr. Monday's statement, which was obviously provided to us before he spoke, already referred to part of Mr. Gambler's objection. We normally have sight of the proposed amendment.
Yeah, sorry, I can answer that. When, if you have any objections come through, we let the applicant say that, so they've got the opportunity to give a response. It wouldn't seem fair to let someone come and give an objection and then the applicant's kind of blindsided and not able to give a clear answer. So we let applicants see any objections before.
That's one of the first ones I think I've seen where the applicant is actually referring to this objection. I don't mind you raising the question.
No, of course not.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions there? No, okay. Nadia, just quickly, you mentioned obviously you're giving access away to King George's fields. It was a question I think around, obviously, you mentioned it was under council ownership. I was under the impression that it was King George's Memorial Trust.
Yeah, it's not King George's Field, just to be clear, Chair, that is proposed to be used. It's Blackshots Fields, not the King George's Field, which is south of there. So it's not that land. I can show you on the if you want. It isn't King George's. It's actually Blackshots Field to the side of the stadium. King George's Field there is immediately south of that.
Okay, is that fenced off? And then a couple of observations. The building itself doesn't seem to be sort of energy efficient. I was looking at it's had some heat pumps, no solar panels. It's not generally.
It fully complies with our sustainability policies and energy policies, so it's highly sustainable. And it actually more than meets our expectations in that regard.
You know, I was just surprised to see.
Yeah, I think that there are a variety of different options they have at their disposal in terms of meeting those requirements, and the report does detail that.
Okay, all right then, so, any other questions? All right then, so who would like to start the voting this evening?
Thank you, Chair. I'm really loath to support this because virtually everything I voted on, since I've been on planning, anything I voted on, the decision's actually gone the opposite way. So me supporting this is probably not a great move for the applicant. First of all, I'll congratulate the ward councillor, Councillor Redsill. She's done a very good job standing up for her residents. In terms of the obligations being followed, I'm relatively relaxed given the nature of this being an established multi-academy trust in the borough. Yeah, if this was a free school application by an entity that wasn't already in the borough, I'd be slightly concerned about how they would work with our highways team. But a trust that's already got William Edwards, Stiff Place Primary, Dean Holmes, I think Chadwell Primary, there's an establishment there, so we kind of know how to work with them. In terms of the need, I know we've heard some commentary about, well, you can just expand other schools. Well, firstly, expanding an existing school at the last minute to accommodate for a bulge year is expensive. It's really undesirable. It's when you get unintended consequences, like having to separate sibling groups if you're not able to actually pull off a bulge year in a nearby school. And also, if you look at all of the figures that we've had in pupil place plans over really the last 10 years, what is clear is the demand happens regardless of what we're doing in terms of school building. The demand is here regardless, and the demand here is growing regardless. So it's not a case of you can reject a school and it turns off the demand. The magnet is on regardless. So that demand will grow. And it's further complicated by the fact that this is an existing school, it's an existing entity. Yes, it's in a temporary building, but it is an existing legal entity as a school. So a rejection of the application wouldn't just be putting the school on ice. It would actually be taking a living, breathing thing that's got over 200 children in it and throwing its future into doubt. So a rejection is fraught with serious complications. I know we've heard some suggestions in the past about, well, it's not a brilliant site, can you not just do a land swap? You know, I remember coming to office as the Cabinet of Education almost 5 years ago now, and we were talking about the acute demand we needed to address. That was 5 years ago we started talking, and we're not even now at the stage where spades are going to go in the ground for this school. So trying to pull off an application like this is just fraught with difficulty. So if we were minded to try and perhaps bounce this back on the hope that another site will miraculously appear, I just don't see that as a viable way forward. I get the arguments about pollution, but again, we're talking in the realms of A, there is no significant objection to the environmental health officer, but B, there's no such thing as an ideal location. You know, Palmer's and the new Osborne School, Thameside Secondary, yeah, they both sit directly on top of the A1089, where I went to school at Hassenbrook. A great part of our sports field runs alongside the main carriageway that comes off the Manorway. So there's just no such thing as an ideal location. I get some of the concerns about a part of the development site being on the other side of the road. It's less than ideal, but it's not particularly rare. You know, Corringham Primary, the infants and the juniors, is actually bisected by a road. Gable Hall, in my patch, they use a great chunk of the playing field off of Williamson's Farm, which is across South End Road. So, you know, that it is an established way that you can get around these things. And the last thing, in terms of the traffic, I get why we had a lengthy debate, and Councillor Fletcher is right that there's nothing more important than making sure you're passing an application that is safe for young people. But all schools have intense road flow issues, and it's about how you mitigate it. During the 4 years that I did the job, I could bounce from our newest school, which is the Harris School in Purpley, to our oldest institution, which is Palmer's, and they've all got exactly the same problem. Yeah, slightly different based on the local circumstances, but the same problem in fundamentals. The schools are big, complicated creatures, and road flow issues are just present. So it's about not how we say, how do we fix the road flow issues at this site, because you can't fix it around any school. It's just about how you mitigate it. I think there's a great deal of mitigation here. I think Councillor Redsill referenced the separate engineering works that the council is paying for in terms of the junction. And again, the nature of having an established trust, the trust would frankly know across all 4 of its current schools that action would be taken against them if road obligations were not adhered to. So really, I've listened to the arguments. The arguments I feel are very well meaning, but actually looking at the totality of what the application means and what it represents, all the arguments I think have got strong mitigating solutions in this paper, and the alternative of a delay or rejection, not only can we not sustain it, because we do need new build schools, temporary accommodation, bulge classes don't work, but we're also in a situation where those parents have got their children in a current existing school, and now is the opportunity to give that school permanence and an actual future by giving it a full and proper building, rather than leaving them in limbo. So I listened to the arguments, Chair, I've listened to the officers' answers, and I'm enthusiastic in favour.
Okay, thank you. Any proposed to Councillor Polly first, then Steve Taylor, then Fletcher, then Councillor Burns. So sorry, Councillor Polly.
Thank you very much, Chair. We've spent a lot of time on this application because I think repeat concerns over the traffic issues. I think we very much need to listen to the resident and to the ward councillor that with this drop off and pick off point, and that not just encouraging parents to drive into the school, but almost enforced. But the easier we make it for them, the more they're going to use it. So I think we really, I would support the comments that really needs to be, as Councillor Redson said, written in stone if we can to the best of it. We also heard in other comments that we seem to have managed to displace the students during 2019 to 2020, therefore this isn't needed. Unfortunately, COVID happened, and we faced a very unprecedented set of circumstances where there was homeschooling, there was the educational facility probably wasn't used to its maximum capacity. So I think that might identify why the need wasn't as urgent during the last year. We have partners on the site. We have Impulse Learning, the rugby club, we have the school now, if that was to be approved tonight. I would hope it will be a happy marriage. I would hope that collectively the partners on the various sites would work together to deliver a fantastic sports hub. And with that said, supply and demand is the key. So if we have got an area where people are using it for school uses, for recreational uses, for a sporting village, if you like, perhaps not quite there yet, but on the road, then bus companies will follow. The public transport, as we've seen with Amazon, we have got bus routes now to Tilbury that we never had because the demand is there. So, I'm, being optimistic and looking forward that we do need to find alternative travel methods. Again, it's something we need to talk to our bus providers about the potential of future planning, that there could be more routes there. But with all of that said, I think these facilities are much needed in the area, and I would I quite welcome that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Foley. Steve Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I'm glad Councillor Holden finds that people's comments are well-meaning. I find that quite satisfying. But one of my comments would be that someone saying to me, we're hoping there will not be problems, talking about the design and access, is a concern to me, because hoping isn't the way to carry on. I would have thought we have a perfect opportunity to design out the potential problems rather than just hoping they don't occur, because that would just put us back in the same place as we are with all the other schools that were built over the last 50 or 60 years that have now got those problems. So that would be my first thought. My second one is that the current volume of traffic, now somebody's mentioned that there's going to be staggered start times, but if you look at that road between 8 and 9 in the morning, it's solid. It is absolutely solid, and in both directions. So quite how slowing it up and introducing more vehicles and putting traffic lights and roundabouts there is going to improve that situation, I struggle with. But again, I guess we're hoping. And the other thing that concerns me is when I look at the applications that have gone through through this committee over the last 8, 9 years, whatever it is, the amount of development that's going on in the west of Thurrock is vast. That's, in my opinion, because I'm bound to protect the green belt, as you well know, but in my opinion, if you're going to put that much housing development, that's where you need to be focusing schools. So I'm never going to be against the school, because I absolutely understand the need for them, and I don't have any issues with the design, but I don't like a road going through the middle of it. I think it's a busy road. In that sense, it's the wrong place. And in terms of children having to travel, I would suggest there's the demand in the west of Thurrock is the one that people should be concentrating on at this moment in time. So I'm not against it, but I have some really serious issues that we're not designing problems out rather than waiting to see if they happen. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be well-meaning. Totally agree with Councillor Holden. I think probably all of us agree that we are short of school places. We've all in each of our wards got examples of families having to send their children outside of the borough. We clearly need more school places. Whether we need it here, I'm not entirely sure. And I have to say that there's a lot about the place in the design that I don't particularly have an issue with. Two things I do have an issue with. 6 schools in the area already.
No, there will be, sorry.
5 already. Kind of feels like this is not a local problem we're trying to solve, but a borough problem. And that then leads me to asking the question, exactly as Stephen said, where in the borough is the issue? Totally understand, as Councillor Holden has pointed out, he put a hell of a lot of effort. I know this because I've spoken to him in the past. Hell of a lot of effort into trying to solve the problem and trying to find a place that will take a school. And I totally appreciate that when you think you found somewhere and some individuals start questioning whether it's the right place, it must feel very frustrating. But we have to. We're putting a school next to a major road, with the possibility in the next few years it'll be stuck next to an even more major road than others. We need to be comfortable that the risks we could all see, and the risks we've been talking about, will be properly dealt with, and we need to feel that that's, that they're being anticipated. But more than that, we need to feel that the extra school places are where the school places are needed. And I'm not sure in either of those 2 cases that what we've got here is the right answer. Totally agree we need an answer, not entirely sure this is it.
Okay, thank you. So I'll carry on with this. Councillor Thompson.
Yes, obviously agree with James, but we do need a school, and I wouldn't vote against the school. But anything that asks me to vote on something, or I can end up with blood in my hands with a dead child, this is what could happen, and I can't vote for something that is line for the school, I can't, unless the access is fed up. I can bottle it and some fence and not work. I can't work if it's a school, I can't work if it's a child.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. So, everybody's gone to school, and I totally get where you're going, Steve, and the ward that I represent has probably got the most regeneration going on it right now, and that's sitting in Paisley, and we've got Harris Academy that is sitting next door to an industrial estate, bordering onto a river with, and a building site right in front of it. So, in terms of what you're saying, Gary, about, I get that. But think about, if you look at my walls, where those children come out every day to lorries, going in and out, next to an lesson garage, you know. But we have to look at the placement. And though imperfect would be a right place to put a school, that school in Harry's is at full capacity. In the new Riverside development, they're going to have a new primary school that they've already saying is going to be at full capacity. The reality is, all along my ward, which has got the most on it again, places like Cockington, where they're looking at building even more, those schools are at full capacity. And the secondary school has already had a new build on it and is at full capacity. Our children are literally going out of borough now in order to get school placement. So for that reason, whether this is right or wrong, it is a school that we very, very much need right now. And so the level of demand and our population growth that will be going over the course of time, and there's no other area that can take this level of building. The access is an issue, but we've covered that insensibly, so I'm really hoping that we can come across that. I'm in favour for the school. Thank you.
Same on that, but what Steve said, we've got it wrong in every single school in Thurrock, we've got a chance to get it right. So why don't we just get it wrong and vote saying you've got to get that right? Come back to the drawing and tell us access, and Councillor Redfield said, I like that access, and that's right. That's the time to say yes, not now when we're risking safety children.
Fine, and right, do we need further hands raised? Councillor Howard, got to be quick, because we've got 5 minutes left.
Yeah, just council questions. Yeah, I get the commentary about it's a very busy road and there's lots of schools already in that area, but there's a reason for that, because that's where the birth rate is and that's where the major housing conurbations are. You know, you could get rid of all of the road traffic problems if you wanted. You could build a massive through school, a primary and secondary combined, double the regular size and create like an American middle school and put it right in the middle of Allset where there are no associated road issues. But what you get with that is you get parents who have to drive all over the borough to drop their children off, makes it very difficult for them to get to work on time. You get children who can never walk to or from school. And also, it was only a couple of years ago that members got very testy with us, where we had millions and millions and millions of pounds overspent on homeschool transport, because we're legally obliged to lay on school transport for children who live more than 3 miles away from school. So I did get your point that it's undesirable to have so many schools in one area, so many schools on busy roads, but to say that's undesirable presupposes that there's a solution to that with these. And you create schools where the demand is. And that's why you have to look at the mitigation that officers put in place. And I've looked at the mitigation, and I think with the best will in the world, the officers have gone as far as they can at this conceptual stage. And this is not a fait accompli. As the school develops, as all schools develop, you'll have moments where you go back to the planning officers or go back to the school and say, I'm not necessarily convinced this is working the way it should. I bring up casework all the time with the lead-ups about scaling Hall, and you tweak things every now and then, you try and improve it. But yeah, I think that presupposes there's a simple fix. I just don't think there is.
Okay, thank you. Was there other hands raised?
Just thank you, Chair, just for members' benefit, really, given what they've said, it's been really interesting listening to what they've said. So going back to what Councillor Polly said, referring to the ward councillor's comments and you know, the residents' desire for specific drop-off and pick-up controls. I've looked at condition 10 on page 172 for the travel plan, and I've seen where we can add further wording there. So page 172, so we can add reference to including within, so the sentence reads, travel plan shall include noted stars, travel plan process and detailed specific measures to reduce the number of journeys made by part of the school buildings hereby permitted, and shall include specific details of the operation and management of the proposed measures. And I suggest we add including specific drop-off and pick-up controls, because that would hopefully give the ward councillor the comfort that she's raised, and I don't see any reason why we could not add that. So that was the first thing. And secondly, in relation to the concerns raised generally by members about why this site, why so many schools here, the Education Department's own pupil plan number report separates the different areas in the borough, designated separate areas, and the central area which this falls within is the area, as Councillor Howden says, with the highest birth rate, and it is where the schools are needed, and that is why there is a need for a further school in the central area because of the pupil numbers. And separately, the report details thoroughly the number of other sites that were looked at and considered, and concluded that this was the most appropriate site in the circumstances of this case. That's all I wanted to add.
Okay, right, sorry, it's 9:30, so I'm just securing. Did you have something brief, was it?
Very brief, and to just make my position very clear. Come back with a solution. I appreciate the perfect solution from there, but come back with a version of this application that answers the very real concerns around that major road, and I'd be prepared to accept.
I was going to just quickly say, in terms of junction capacity, the junction works. The modelling assessment is objective, the junction works. So it doesn't cause significant delays.
But we wouldn't have warning signs because this school is not going to fill up to a capacity of 1,200 overnight.
That's when the school is at capacity. At the moment, when the school is operating at capacity, the modelling has been done, it will not cause significant delays.
What I'm saying is the build-up would happen slowly, so if there were issues, we'd be able to identify them a mile off.
And tweaking.
Yeah, the traffic signals will work on what is a mover system, so it will adjust to wherever the worst problem is. If there's queuing does occur on the main